Hey everybody, it's Monday again, and this week it is Mr. Dave Way. Hi, Dave.
Am I on?
Yes. Yes,
Hey,
you
Ed,
are.
how you doing?
Good, good. Coming to us from Way Station in the
It,
hills.
it's a gorgeous day at the way station and in all of LA. It's just gorgeous here today. It's like, I don't know, almost 90 degrees, 85 degrees. Beautiful.
Wow. Nice where
Yeah.
you are. Nice.
Yeah.
Probably a little hotter down in the flats, I would
And
imagine. So
92.
I got a little bit of housekeeping, which you're just going to sit through, but what the hell. So these interviews are finally coming out as a podcast. It took me longer than I thought to get going, but they are. And I believe the second episode of the podcast went live today. So Matt Rossbang and Joe Barisi are out. And then Greg and Nina Wells will come out next Monday. And Mark's going to put the link in the chat. So that'll take you to the main page, and then it's on pretty much every service that does podcasts. And this one will be a podcast in approximately 33 weeks. So next, what is that? August? I don't know. Something like that. So we're doing that. Now, the other bit of housekeeping we have to do is half of the promo stuff for this, the little one-line blurb that I had to write for you. When I first did it, I mistakenly put from the Atlanta hip hop scene because we met in Atlanta.
Yeah,
The
right.
first time
Yeah.
we met in 1991.
Is that when it was?
So
Yes.
almost 30 years ago.
I figured we would talk about this. And
Yeah,
yeah.
but I had a brain fart when I was doing it, and it took me weeks to realize. Like, I mean, I did the oh, New York, blah blah blah, and then like, oh, hold on a second, I said Atlanta. So you are
Well, I
not.
mean, I did spend a lot of time in Atlanta in the early 90s, but,
Well, see, so I was
that was,
right.
I think, as a matter of fact, no, it wasn't the first one, but that was, I think, the second project that I did with LA and Babyface. It was Jermaine Jackson,
Yep,
right? And
exactly.
it was a remix of a song called Word to the Bad, which was actually, I was in a bit of a tough pickle here because it was a kind of a diss to Michael song. And I had just finished with
Just
Michael.
yeah.
And I think we might have still been working on it. I can't remember. But they're really close. So yeah, I was like, oh, am I going to get in trouble for working on this? But no,
It
it
all
turned out
worked
all right.
out.
But,
Yeah.
well, yeah. And I remember, so you were, if I'm allowed to say what you were doing down
You
there,
can,
which was working
yeah,
with John Barnes, the great John Barnes,
yeah,
who was the synclav guy.
yeah,
And that was my first time seeing and working with a synclav. And I was just like, whoa, this is like a whole studio
yeah,
right here in your, on your keyboard.
yeah.
And,
We were
you
set
were
up
the
out in
guy.
the live room, and
Yeah.
then I don't think it was a named storm, but there was a gigantic rainstorm, and then there was a lake out in the live room. So we had the synclav and all the other gear in about an inch of water, just hoping we
Oh,
weren't going
really?
to
I don't
die.
remember that.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah, that was good. That was
Ooh.
great. That might have been after you split. I don't remember. We were there for a
Okay.
little
Yeah.
bit,
I
but
don't remember that part.
anyway, so
Yeah.
Dave, let's
Yeah.
go back to the very beginning because that's what I like to do because
Okay.
it's easier that way. I like to get the
Oh,
well.
nice.
So look, there's lots to know about before you actually start making records because I think that's been the really interesting thing with all these interviews is everybody's path in is the same but totally different, and I think yours is sort of typical in that you grew up listening to records like crazy. You played
Yeah.
in bands. You started recording those bands, right?
Yeah.
On
Yeah.
your quarter-inch machine, right? Radio Shack
Absolutely.
mixer, like just like
Yeah.
every good
Yeah,
kid. So
whatever, and band members were chosen because of whatever gear they brought to the table.
right,
We would rehearse it at our house, and so if you had a tape recorder, quarter-inch Sony tape recorder, you were in the band. Come bring it to rehearsal next week. I'll just leave it here because we're going to rehearse again on Tuesday. So just leave
right,
it here, and yeah, it was. My mom was so great because she let us rehearse in the living room
wow,
for years. Yeah. So and the stuff just basically stayed set up whenever whenever we thought we were going to be coming back again. So yeah, that was kind of the beginning of it, you know.
So no one in your family was in music business or?
Well, my dad was a singer. He was a barbershop singer. And my earliest memories of kind of him being into music were two things. He was pretty much always in a quartet, and they would rehearse at the house. And so I would be in our PJs, and you know, it'd be 7 o'clock. We're getting ready to go to bed, and they were just getting ready to rehearse, and we'd listen to them sing 4-part harmony for
that's amazing.
20 minutes. Yeah, and so I loved it, and you know, it was. You know, I still love barbershop and because, you know, of those memories it brings. But, you know, I would see my dad kind of work things out. He had this little air organ. You know what those are? Where they have the buttons where you can push for the chords.
Oh,
and then
yeah.
You can play, and it's just a monophonic keyboard that sounds really almost, you know, harmonium-ish.
Yeah.
But, and he would work out chords. Because he knew theory really well, so which you had to if you're going to sing barbershop, because it's all, you know, harmony. And he would work out chords and his part and stuff. And he was a baritone, so which is like the part that makes the least sense.
Right.
Because
right. It's all the
you're
extra
filling
notes.
in the holes wherever the holes are. So I would listen to him sing it, and I'm like, that's what, you know, that's what you're singing? That doesn't make any sense, you know. But then you put the other guys in there, and voila.
Right. Yeah. And what about the recording thing, man? How did that happen?
Well, yeah. So these bands that we were in, it was a couple of bands, but I played. Well, first I think I played keyboards in a band. Maybe I played keyboards and guitar. I don't know, because I played both for a bit, and actually sang too, which is embarrassing to admit.
I would like to hear some of that.
Anybody who's ever heard me sing now knows how bad I am. But I would, so, you know, we would rehearse in our living room and have everything kind of set up. And this one guy in our band had like I said, a Sony 1/4-inch machine, and he had a little Radio Shack 4-channel mixer. And I remember going to his house the first time we went to his house to rehearse, and we actually recorded a song because he had it all set up. And I came in and I played guitar, I think. And then, we played the Eagles' Best of My Love. And when I heard it back, I was just like flabbergasted. I was like, that's us. That sounds like a record. That's like, you know, and I think that was the first time I kind of heard what tape actually does, you know, and it's like, it just sounded real, and it sounded, you know, so I like I said, it's like, hey, let's rehearse at my house next time and bring your stuff. And so I would, you know, dabble with this stuff afterwards. And he had, like, you know, lots of cool guitar pedals. He had an electro harmonics phaser that, like, I would put the piano mic through the phaser and play Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds or whatever, you know.
Right.
So I started to just tinker with that stuff. And then we bought a PA, and I would kind of use the PA because it had line outputs on the back and stuff. And I would use that to go into that Sony machine, and then also another cassette recorder that I had, and would bounce back and forth between a Sony and a cassette until, of course, we know it just sounded like, you know,
yeah,
and a song in the background. So yeah, that was a good couple of years of just getting into what you know, where the cables go and what the knobs do.
Right.
You know? And I loved it, you know, and sometimes we'd get a recording of something that sounded pretty decent. And I was like, I don't know how we did that, but all right, we can play that for people.
Right. That's awesome. And you're listening a lot to the Beatles at this point, right?
Pretty much, I would say, from the time I was maybe 13, maybe a little bit earlier, to 17, all I would listen to was the Beatles, or, like, you know, McCartney solo and John Lennon solo records. But I would save up my allowance to get a new Beatles album whenever I had $11 or $9, whatever it was back then. And each time it was just like a whole new world of sounds and melodies, and like you just play it over and over and over again. I would, come home from school, listen until dinner time, then, play with the band or whatever, and then go back and listen to more. It was just Beatles, 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 and Elton John and Stevie Wonder, but pretty much Beatles. That was it.
Did you almost immediately, once you got into the tape machine and the pedals and things like that, try and recreate stuff, or you would just sort of happen on things and go, holy shit, that's
like that phaser, I was like, oh, that sounds like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, maybe kind of, but it sounded psychedelic. So and I think I had an MXR distortion pedal. That was about it. So I didn't really know. The other guy in our band was the real guitarist. So he played the solos. The guy just played rhythm. So he had a pedal board.
Right.
And he would, I remember he made, do you remember there was this Electro Harmonics little keyboard, little synth mini, I think it was called a micro synth, right? And it was about this big. And I guess this is a little older now. I'm probably about 16 or 17, maybe 17. And he decided that he could turn them into foot pedals so that we could play Rush in our set. So he made wooden pedals, and he had contacts on them that connected wires to the contact. And it actually worked, but they would never stick, but it actually worked when they would stick. And so he would do stuff like that. And, so I kind of saw these possibilities. I was like, oh, so that's how that works. You just connect a wire to it. God, what's a funny story? This just reminded me now. So we decided that we needed to have a PA, our own PA, right? This is when we were just starting to play out, but maybe we hadn't even played out yet. But we just decided we needed a PA. So,
well, because you were going to be huge.
We were going to be huge, bigger than the Beatles. And so, this guy who was a Mr. Go to it, it was, all right, we'll just make it. We'll make our own cabinets and we'll get our speakers. And so we built these big, huge cabinets with, I think there were 4 15-inch speakers, probably not even like full fidelity, just, but, and each one had a cabinet that was about 3 feet by 2.5 feet, right? Stacked on top of each other. So we looked like, Van Halen or something in a basement. Well, now we had moved down to the basement. And then we finally got a gig, and we were like, great. All right, we got to get to the gig Saturday we got to load in at 4:00. And we're taking the stuff out, and we realized, because we had built the speakers in the basement, that they were too big to get out of the basement.
So they're still there.
They're still there at 53 Carnegie Drive. Yeah. So, these are the lessons you learn.
What'd you do?
We just brought our amps and plugged our vocals into the amps, and, that was all we could
great.
do. Yeah. It was fine. No, there was probably 6 people there. So, it didn't really matter. Yeah.
God, but it didn't look as cool, did it?
No, we wanted to invite everybody to the basement the next day. What we really sound like. Yeah.
You're not getting the full picture. So did you at any point during this think like, oh, I want to be a musician for a living? Or when you saw recording, did you get bitten pretty quick?
I think, maybe at first I did. And I liked writing songs. I wrote, because we did originals in our band. So I liked writing songs.
Can I get a couple of song titles? You remember.
Yeah. There was, I think it was like Tall Dark Stranger or Cold Dark Stranger, something like that. I don't know. It was in like B minor to G,
Yeah.
A to B minor. And then there was Your House Is Gone, which was a little psychedelic. I think I remember I wrote that on NyQuil.
On NyQuil. Dangerous.
The NyQuil dream, yeah.
Your house is gone. And was that a metaphor, or was that like a hurricane thing?
It was a dream. In this dream, I went to like my girlfriend's house, and it was gone.
And so you had to tell her about it.
But it was sung with like a pseudo British accent, because everything, and this was probably 1978 or something like that. So everything I was listening to was English. And so this song had a fake London accent. Yeah.
God, you have a tape somewhere, don't you?
Well, I don't know. Somebody probably does. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll bet.
With the
Nice.
speakers in the basement. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think I knew pretty early on that I liked writing and I liked the recording part of it. I was like, I'm not a good enough player, and the singing thing was just because nobody else was gonna. I would sing Beatles songs. That was it.
Right.
And it wasn't until I got to college. I did my first year of college right out of high school. I went to Tulane University, and I was there to study civil engineering for some reason, mainly because I liked architecture in high school when I took architecture classes. And when I got there, I had all these heavy math and science classes, and I just said to myself, "This is like, I can't hang with this." And I literally stopped going to classes like by October. I just like, this is it. This is all wrong. I'm not supposed to be here. What do I want to do? And I remember just going to there was a piano room that was kind of open, and I would just go to the piano room and play, depressing Jackson Browne songs to myself to get me through it. And but I remember telling my parents when I was going to be coming back for Thanksgiving that it's like, I don't want to come back. I can't do it. This isn't what I want to do. And they're like, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I think I want to be a recording engineer. And because I had just kind of realized it, in all this time, it's like, I really like music. Before that, I wanted to be a baseball player, but I knew that wasn't going to happen either. But I was like, I think, being in the studio would be good. And they were like, well, can you get a degree in that? Because, well, that's all they cared about. And I said, I don't know, but we'll find out. And then, so I came back and I just went to community college for like a year while I kind of sorted it out. And in that time, I applied to Berkeley College of Music.
Right. Which would have been, one of the 2 4-year programs, because I had the exact same thing and I ended up at Miami. So.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah. So this was early in that educational, being able to get a degree in music production and engineering. I think it was the second year that Berkeley had this program.
Right.
When I applied, it was their new program. And I got accepted, which I couldn't believe, but because my playing, I knew Berkeley was a music school, and you had to play and you had to be good. And I wasn't very good. I knew chords and, that was about it really. But I got accepted. I sent a tape, I think, of one of my tapes that I made, in the basement. So maybe that got me the gig. And, but anyway, once I got to Berkeley, then I knew, this is it. This is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I want to do. One of my roommates was a super workaholic, and he was very organized and had a great work ethic, and that really rubbed off on me in a good way. And we would spend, we'd stay up till 3, 4 in the morning. He would compose things on his, he had a Korg Sigma synth. And I think actually at first that's all he had, a monophonic synth. He had a Juno 106.
Nice.
And we would make tapes because I brought,
Of course.
I didn't bring the Sony tape because the guy took it back, but I had 2 cassette players I went back and forth between, and the mixer that I still had, and a couple of mics. And we would make recordings, and I remember having, this evolved from that then to a 4-track, a Porta Studio, and then to an 8-track 1/4-inch, with a Yamaha mixer. Every year it would get a little more. I would save up all my allowance, and it's summer. I remember one summer I was like, I really need to make enough to get this 8-track. So I worked 2 jobs during the summer. I would be like a security guard in the night and work at a cable company during the day. So it was just like, whatever I got to do, this is what I want. So yeah. And Berkeley was fantastic. I just loved my experience there. Hunkered down.
And it's there's so many recording schools now that it is hard to imagine when it was a brand new thing to even teach it, because traditionally you can't learn anything in school. You got to work in the studios, and
Right. It was an apprenticeship situation. You
Yeah.
just went right to the studio, like Al Schmidt told you his story. His uncle was in the studio business, and he just said, "Come on in, we'll
like,
teach
all
you."
right. Yeah. But I mean, even while, well, I would say until the 90s, really, it was sort of frowned upon by a lot of people, the whole going to school for recording thing. Like, that's not a thing.
Well, I can understand. It's particularly this first, us being the first kind of, round of these graduates who come out of recording school thinking, they're ready to make gold records and show everybody what they can do. And, I pretty quickly realized when I got to the Hit Factory, which is where I went right out of Berkeley, that I don't know anything. I gotta just shut up and learn and watch, and maybe every once in a while ask some questions that don't sound so stupid. Yeah.
But I think the thing is that that's every young assistant on their first gig thinks they're the producer. It doesn't matter if you went to school or not. You just know some more words if you went to school.
Show everybody everything you can do.
Yeah, exactly.
I can write songs. I can play the guitar. I can engineer it. I can mix it. I can do, I can play all the parts. Yeah, shut up, kid. Go take out the trash.
So, I mean, anything of note while you're at Berkeley? I mean, other people who were there at the same time that you're still in touch with? I'd imagine there's a big group.
Well, when I was there, I think Tony Maserati and I overlapped a little bit. I think he might have been there the last 2 years I was there. Right. I can't remember, but we did overlap a little bit. Maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
Let's say you did. It's a better story if you did.
Yes. We were roommates.
You were the one who told him to stop playing guitar and start engineering.
Let's see, who else was there? And in the engineering side, gosh, I'm struggling.
It doesn't matter. I mean,
but but there were guys. I constantly run into people who were there when I was there, who are in the business and still doing so. And I remember at one point, one of the teachers said, soberingly, only 2% of you guys are actually gonna make a living in music. He said that to the whole class, and we all kind of looked at each other,
like, all right, well, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you.
And I remember saying to myself, I'm going to be the 2%. I was just like, I was determined. I wanted it. So.
Yeah. Well, so how'd you get the gig at Hit Factory? Because I'd imagine that was every single person from Berkeley was trying to get that gig.
I remember there were a lot of guys interviewing. As a matter of fact, I remember, do you know Vic Anasini, the mastering engineer?
No.
He's at Sony BMG, works out of Battery. But he was a high school, he was in my high school, and we were classmates, and we were actually in a band at one point. My first band, Vic was the bass player. And I remember he had gone to, I forget what school he went to, but he came in the same day to interview at the Hit Factory that I did, and he had a briefcase, and I didn't have a briefcase. Boy. And I thought, oh man, I blew it. I'm not going to get this gig. Vic's got the briefcase, and but there was like 20, maybe not 20, maybe 12 guys my age out filling out forms, and I subsequently come to find out after getting the gig at the Hit Factory that every week there's 12 kids with resumes coming in, and maybe one of them gets it when one of the assistants gets fired, and assistants got fired on a regular basis there. Yeah. A lot of guys were not ready for it. It was tough. It was a hard,
super high pressure, and
pressure. You had the top. Honestly, there was Power Station and Hit Factory in New York that had all the big records being made pretty much at those two studios. The biggest budget records. So we had every day you had, Bob Clearmountain, Chris Lord, Algie, Tom, Roy Halley would be upstairs doing a pulsing, Graceland, and Keith Richards is doing Expensive Winos, and Cyndi Lauper and Billy Joel and Hall and Oates and all, the biggest names of the 80s. And you couldn't mess up. There was no room for
And had they opened the building on West 54th yet, or this was still in the?
This is West 54th.
This is right when it first opened.
The first one on West 54th.
Right.
Then yeah.
Right. So not the new marbly building, but the older, funkier one. Yeah.
Just had a green awning out front. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I spent a bit too much time there. But just before we get into your time there, I wanted to mention something, because we talked about like the music you love, but you also started to really follow a couple of producers, right, while you were at Berkeley. I mean, the Hugh Padgham and Lily White were
those are guys I wanted to be. Yeah, because my favorite records, after I got out of my Beatles phase, which is basically around 78, when all of a sudden, the Police and the Clash and Elvis Costello and U2 and Peter Gabriel and XTC and all these amazing records started coming out, and I turned from the Beatles and went towards that, particularly English stuff, and I kept seeing their names on all my favorite records, and so that's I remember when I was at Berkeley, I was like, that those are the guys. That's what do I got to do to be them?
Right.
I'm still asking that question.
Yeah. Well, I think we all are.
Yeah,
we all are.
But those were so innovative and technologically, moving the ball forward. There was so much just enthusiasm and inspiration going on, creativity, like, for days, man. It was such a great time, and the music business really needed it. But I was so excited about music at that point. I just, was listening all day long.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you could, and there was good stuff to listen
also,
to.
I'm trying to remember when the first Walkman came out, but it was right around that time, because I used to have a Walkman when I would working at the Hit Factory. I was living on Staten Island, which is technically New York City. And I thought, okay, it's not that far. It's just over the bridge to get to the Hit Factory. And I, very quickly found out that it's like a 2-hour trip from my house. I'd have to walk to the bus station, wait for the bus, take the bus to the ferry, half an hour, wait for the ferry, good 20 minutes. Then the ferry takes a half an hour to get over. Then I got to wait for the train, take the train up to 54th Street, and finally get there 2 hours later. And it wasn't too bad going there, but coming home at, 2:30 in the morning sometimes, you're when I started assisting at a studio called Soundworks, where I was working those kind of late hours, trying to get it. It would take you 3 hours to get home,
right?
If not more.
And then you had to be back up and leave.
Yeah, and I would get to the ferry and just miss, the boat taking off. I have to wait for another hour because they only took off once on the half hour, and I'd fall asleep at the ferry station, right, or fall asleep on the ferry, and because now it's 5:30 in the morning, and I got to be back at 10, and I'd fall asleep. And then, it was another hour. I just realized it doesn't even make sense to go home. Just turn around and go back to the studio and sleep on the couch, which is what I did.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did the same thing, but I was in Jersey City. So it was the PATH train, but same thing. Yeah. You'd run and watch it pulling out. And
right. Exactly.
Perfect. So before we get you over to Soundworks, though, let's talk a little bit about, the time at Hit Factory, because I mean, as you say, that's all the biggest stuff going on. Basically, they had half of the. Oh yeah, that's Squid. Squid helps conduct the interviews.
All right, hey Squid.
Oh, and Squid's a little wet at the moment, so you just stay over there, pal. It's obviously raining. So you must have gotten to work on some pretty ridiculous sessions while you were there, right?
Well. There were, like I said, the biggest stars of the 80s were all coming in and out the doors there. I mean, it was, you know, all those I mentioned and more, you know, whoever.
Well, I mean, you got assisting credits on Duran Duran and Brian Wilson, so that's pretty good.
Well, Brian Wilson. So, you know, I think I was only at the Hit Factory for about a year, maybe a little more. I can't remember. But I started as just being a runner, and I did that for, I don't know, 7 to 8 months, something like that. And then I started to move into assisting. And one of the first things I assisted on was Brian Wilson's solo album, Russ Titelman produced in '88. And this was in the, like, deep into the Dr. Landy era of Brian Wilson. And it was so weird. Like, everybody had, like, nobody was allowed to talk to Brian. And if anybody accidentally talked to Brian, Dr. Landy or his people would say, "What did you say to him? What happened? What did you say back?" They, you know, it was just really weird stuff. So, you know, my job was to just be there. It was just like some overdub sessions and stuff, some percussion and some vocal overdubs and maybe some piano or something. But I remember one time Brian just going out there and starting to play, you know, he just like walked out and started playing the piano. And I was like, oh shit, that's, you know, that's Brian Wilson playing like only, and singing like only Brian Wilson can, and writing like only Brian Wilson can, you know. And, you know, it was a high pressure kind of thing because, you know, the studio was run highly efficiently. Yeah. And so it was great for the clients. Tough place to work because you're on, you know, pins and needles all the time, hoping that you're not going to get fired, because people got fired all the time. So you were always like, I don't want to get fired. Yeah. And, you know, I remember, I don't know if I should say this. Yeah, I think I can say this. I would do it. So I mentioned Keith Richards was in the studio doing the expensive vinyls, and they, you know, so I would get to the studio as a runner to clean up at, I don't know, 8 o'clock in the morning or something like that. And they had, you know, expensive vinyls had literally just walked out probably 20 minutes before. And so I walked in and all the amps are still on, and, you know, there's incriminating evidence all around, and, you know, so we got to clean it all up. And, but Keith's guitar was right there on a stand, still plugged in. I think it was a Princeton, and there's nobody else around. So
of course you did.
Got it, 5-string, and I just went, bow, doo, doo, and then put it down, and I was like, that's it. I did it. Yeah. So.
Wow. See, and these days that would have been all over the internet. You would have selfied the shit out of that.
At this point, if Keith wants to come after me, fine. Come on, Keith.
Well, he knows somebody was playing it.
Yeah, know. Exactly. He came in the next day. That's right. The assistant got fired that next day because he's like, "You've been playing my guitar."
Somehow, I don't think that would have been an issue.
You know. Yeah, but there was, you know, there was well, Bruce Springsteen was there doing Tunnel of Love, which was and I think they were just finished mixing Born in the USA album. Or I just remember I became the tape librarian, which was a lot of responsibility and a lot of work. So every tape that came in and out of the Hit Factory had to be logged in with these index cards and like where they came from, who signed for them, what date, what time, where they go afterwards, and they have to be accounted for. And then some of them, there was tape storage, but then some of them, like the, you know, Bruce Springsteen or Keith Richards or, you know, the Stones or somebody like that, would have to go in the vault, which wasn't really a vault, but it was like this crawl space where you had to take these 2-inch tapes and put them, you know, like this and there would be like 200 tapes. Right. And they, you know, you'd have to do 200 tapes. Like, so I got pretty good.
And a reel of tape, a reel of 2 inches, what, 12.5 pounds or something? Remember, like 2 of them weighs 25 pounds or something like that.
And you didn't want to do one at a time. You had to do like 2 because you're trying to get it, you know, take forever. So, but yeah, I did that for a while. And then I started to just get into assisting. And then we had this crazy misunderstanding on a session me and the studio manager. He thought I got a tip, and they caught wind of it somehow and came to me and said, that wasn't a tip. That was for the studio, not for you.
Oh,
So
boy.
yeah. So I had to like give it back, which was a whole thing because I had already spent it because I didn't have any money. So I gave it to my girlfriend to pay our bills. So anyway, after that, I was like,
And of course, it wasn't for the studio.
oh, I'm not
Look, if it were
the
for the
guy
studio,
came
they
up to
wouldn't
me
have been
and said,
giving it
"Hey,
to
good
you.
job, kid," and he put $100 in my hand, And I remember asking one of the other students, I said, "Did you ever get a tip?" Because this is all new to me. I never, this is like my second or third session. And he's like, "Yeah, sometimes," or they'll give you like some CDs or, stuff like that. I was like, "Yeah, I got $100 last night." So anyway, so after that, it was, they were trying to make me quit. And so they put me on the phones. Now the phones at the Hit Factory, if anybody was ever there. So, there was the front door, and I'd be sitting at the desk. And then there was a door with a buzzer that led to studio 2 or 3 or whatever. And then there was another door with a buzzer that led to 2 other studios. And then there was a camera to a studio on the 5th floor that led to another one, right? And nobody could get into any of those rooms unless you buzzed them, right? So you're watching the traffic all over. There's like 4 doors that you have to buzz every time. And at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it's just like this. Plus you're on the phone trying to answer the phones. Plus you're trying to take down the orders for the phone for food and there, and it was a nightmare. It was the hardest job I've ever had. And I've had some pretty shitty, hard jobs. And, I think it was like, you're going to quit, kid. And I did. And I did that for like 2 months until then they were like, "Okay, this isn't working out. You got to go." So I was completely dejected. And I remember going in for my last, pick up my last paycheck. I think it was like on a Saturday. And I'm walking down the stairs at the Hit Factory to 54th Street. And I just happened to run into this guy who used to be a tech at the studio. Reiner was his name. And I literally bump into him. And he says, "Oh, what are you doing?" He was German. He was like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I just got fired. I don't know what I'm doing." And he was working. He had moved to a studio right across the street underneath Studio 54 called Soundworks. And he said, "Oh, well, we're actually looking for someone because the assistant, he's now an engineer and we need someone. I put in a good word for you." I was like, "Oh, that would be so great. Please do that." And so then I went and got an interview. And, I remember trying to interviewing with the owner. And at Soundworks, they had this giant wall of outboard gear, right? And it all came with the room, as opposed to the Hit Factory where all there was like a PCM 42, maybe a Pultec, and you had access to the plates, and everything else you had to pay for. At this studio, it was just like wall of outboard that had everything. And at one point he said, "So all this stuff?" And I just lied through my teeth. I said, "Sure, I know all that stuff," and because I was like, I have to have this gig,
Did you bring a briefcase?
No, I didn't bring a briefcase. Luckily, again, it still worked out. But so I got the gig, and I remember my first session. So they had, and I had never seen one before, 3M, the Mitsubishi digital 32 track, right? Which was kind of a not as popular digital tape multi-track that most people use the Sony one, and these were all very new at the time.
Yeah.
But so I was just assisting for this great engineer, Michael Hutchinson, and he was, I don't remember what he was doing, but it was just me and him, and he had a kick trigger that he had put in the AMS. He's like, "Oh, okay, I want to print this on the multi-track now. So go ahead, patch that in, put it in record." I passed it in, and I go to record, and I can't figure out how to get it in record because it's got this weird thing that I didn't know where you have to actually push the button of the track you want to put in record. Very digital now, but back then, the thinking, you're just like, there was some other step I can't remember. And he's like, the hell's the matter with you? You don't know how to put the tape machine and record, with a big New York, you don't know how to put, oh man, what am I, so he complained to the owner. Oh, boy. And I finally figured it out. But the next day, the owner brings me in and goes, are you going to be all right? I thought you said, all this stuff. I was like, I do. I just, the tape machine, I didn't, it's, don't worry. And so I would read all these manuals for everything, on my train ride in, which was 3 hours long. And thankfully, I got through it without any other big issues. And, actually, ironically, within like a couple of weeks from that, some guy came in, I don't remember what his name was, and he was mixing a project and I was just assisting. And then he said he couldn't finish it, but he liked me. And he says, there's 3 more songs to do. I can't do them. I got to go somewhere. You do them. And I didn't even know how to use the SSL automation really. Like I knew how to do all the recall stuff like I had to do as an assistant, but I didn't know how to run the automation. But it was just me on my own. And I did these mixes, FedExed them to him, and he liked them. And, so like 3 weeks later, I was like a mixer, what I mean? And
amazing.
I just remember at one point, I was still assisting for a good, year after that. But I remember an engineer coming in at one point and I was like, I know more than this guy. Why is he the engineer? Why am I the assistant? And I just remember thinking to myself, it's like, it's just because you say you're an assistant. You don't say if somebody asks you, what do you do? I say, I'm an assistant engineer at,
right.
Soundworks. When in my head, I should be saying I'm an engineer because I am an engineer, So, and I remember that kind of mind shift kind of just put me in that place of like, I'm an engineer now, damn it, And that by this point, I did know everything on the wall, and I knew how to put the machine and record, and I knew,
right.
I knew how to run the automation, and I started getting gigs as a mixer because we did a lot of remixes.
Right.
This was primarily a remix studio, so this was like New York, 1988, 89, and it was just back then every single that came out had a remix done, so if it was going to be released as a single, they sent it out to multiple remixers. And one of them, the top guy, was this guy, Shep Pettibone. And he used to pretty much every week do a remix a week. And I was working with him and then another guy who would do a lot of remixes, but also was getting a lot of he was in a band called Guy. And this was a producer named Teddy Riley, who was just starting to take off. He had kind of come up with this new style called New Jack Swing. And so I was working over 100 hours a week with basically going back and forth between these two guys. And within not too long, they started asking me to, do a mix, sometimes we'd work so late that the mix engineer who was hired for it would just say, at 4 o'clock in the morning, it's like, I'm done, I'm out of here, and then I would take over from 4 till 10 in the morning and kind of finish, all the dub mixes and all the mixes where you go crazy and just start putting effects on everything. And I just loved the fact that, because I didn't know anything about dance remixes, right? But it was just amazing to me that you could take this 4-minute song and turn it into these 7-minute completely different arrangements, where you would make an intro that would go on for a minute, and you'd arrange everything with the automation on the SSL. So the idea that you had so much power as a mixer and that you could turn anything into anything, you know what I mean? It's like you started to look at the multi-track as just these pieces of a puzzle that you could move around, because you could put things in the AMS and do all this, kind of, unorthodox at that time stuff. And people would, and you just had license to go crazy. It was like the crazier, the better. So you'd put all kinds of delays and effects on everything and make these crazy breakdowns and make the vocals stutter and do weird effects. And I loved it. I was like, man, this is, the mixer is the guy,
Right.
And I learned so much doing those remixes because it was all about the power of the SSL and being able to do all this stuff. It was like surgery. You were just turning something into something else. It was great.
Yeah, there are a bunch of people like you and Tony and a ton where they come out of the growing up with the Beatles, bands, things, and then hip hop starts happening in different ways for different people, but nobody minded. Nobody was like, oh, well, it's just the work I had, but I still really wanted to do bands. It was so creative, especially for the engineer, that it seems like it was just the best place to be for a lot of people.
Like I said, I didn't particularly care for that kind of. I wasn't a guy who would go out to the clubs and dance all night, but there was a powerful scene, and you heard about all these people who were doing that, and they would go, and they would love a remix that they'd talk about the remix, the 12 inches, as opposed to the radio version.
Right.
And actually a lot of times we would do a radio edit of the remix, right? So that hopefully it would get played on the radio instead of the official version. And very often they would, if not right out of the gate, use that or use it in the video or just release it on radio afterwards. But, I remember working on Like a Prayer, the Madonna song, where we did Michael Hutchinson, that engineer, did the remix, and we did a short version of it. And that became the version in the video and the version that was on the radio,
Right.
And other versions of songs with Teddy Riley where, they would just use the remix version as the single. So it was like you were also trying to knock off the, original mix and do it better, So it was fun. I loved it. It was crazy. I think about the hours that we would spend. We would never get out of there before 10 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
And sometimes you wouldn't start until 11 o'clock at night. So I don't, that was just the hours we did.
Yeah. Brutal. Yeah. I couldn't do that now, but yeah, that was just the thing, wasn't it? And I think it's this great situation to be in where it's, you're working on a super high profile project, but with no pressure.
Yeah.
And you're just going to hand it in.
They would be often, whatever. So something that you knew the record company was going to get behind, right? They were going to put it on the radio or put it on, a video maybe, or, at least people are going to hear it. And the idea that they would just take whatever you gave them. And, and we would, one of the other cool parts about doing these remixes was just the actual tape editing, of just editing the half inch, which didn't really do other than putting leader on the tape. When you're just doing, you're working on whatever, Bruce Springsteen or something like that. It's just, you record the mix and then you put some leader on at the end and you're done. This was like, all right, let's do, these stutter edits and make copies of that piece and put it in like 5, measure it and say, okay, that's the 16th note. That's, that's a whole note there, whatever. Let's turn it upside down and make a reverse sound here. And let's take this whole piece that happens at the end and put it in the middle. And, so it was a lot of technological creativity. So I loved it.
Yeah. Yeah. All this stuff you could do in seconds now, but you don't necessarily, because you could do anything now. So you kind of don't do stuff. Whereas there, you'd really make a plan, and half of the plan was the technical way you were going to do it.
Oh yeah. And it was not easy. It would take a day, sometimes a whole day, just to get a tempo map that would be solid so that you could put your drum machine drums and it would sync up with the music. That was no easy task. Now that's,
using the master link or one of those.
The SBX 80 sync box, and going in there and editing the time code and the bars and like trying to line them up. Oh my gosh, it was horrible. That part sucked, but the creative part was fun.
Yeah. Well, and you worked on a ton of stuff with them, right? How long were you working with Teddy just in that kind of mode with him and Shep?
Well, when I was an assistant there, I was working with Teddy and Shep, and that was probably about a year. And then and in that time, I had started to do mixes for other people. But then at one point, Teddy's regular engineer, who was the assistant that had moved up, that I had replaced, right? I think he had been working so long and so hard that he said, I need to take a vacation. And he took off for a week or 2 weeks or something. And I was there. And this was like how you used to get a break back then. And it was just like, oh, okay, you want to do it? You know, I was like, yeah, sure. And the first thing was a remix. Do you remember the song Keep On Moving by Soul to Soul? That was, it was a big hit in whatever, 89 or something like that. And we did a remix of it. And that was my first one with Teddy. And it went great and he liked it. And so anyway, I was now the guy. And, the guy I replaced never came back. And from there on, I was the mixer and the engineer and Teddy's guy. So I pretty much at that point stopped working with Shep and I only worked with Teddy. And that was a good 2 years of, and Teddy was, like I said, just starting to take off.
Yeah.
And he was getting all kind of like these really prime remixes to do. And then, just productions, regular productions.
Well, exactly. Like what was the turning point? I mean, not that there would be a single thing, but like that transition from the remixes into production it's kind of a big deal.
Well, he was doing both. As when I first started working with him, he was the band guy that he was in had just had a big hit, and he had just had a big hit producing My Prerogative for Bobby Brown and a Keith Sweat song. So he was like super hot, getting all this radio play. And the sound was very different. Like there was nobody who sounded like Teddy production wise. And I just happened to come, step in at the right time when he was getting a lot of work. Every week was a new either remix or, working on somebody's album. That went on for about a year. And all of a sudden now I'm having songs that are getting played on the radio, whether it's Heavy D or Cool Mode D or, who else was back then? I can't even remember. His band Guy, we did, songs for film soundtracks and stuff like that. Do the Right Thing. We did a song for that. And, I can't remember, but, and that went, and then we did another Guy album where I actually, Teddy was so great. He asked me to help him write songs because he was a collaborative songwriter, and he always had. I don't think I can remember him ever writing a song all on his own. He always had somebody else he was getting mostly lyric ideas and stuff from, but he would come up with a track, and then it was like, okay, let's fill this in. And he had a song that he was doing for a group called High Five, which was part of like this lawsuit settlement that he had because his manager had cleverly got around him having a production deal with Jive, where he would just produce other people's records and it would say arranged by Teddy Riley. Right. So, so they sued him. And then part of his deal was he had to work with this group. So it was just me and him in the studio. It was like 2:00 in the morning. And he said, I need lyrics for this. And I was like, okay, I got it. And he sang me the chorus. He's like, oh, it goes, I like the way you kiss me when we're playing the kissing game. And I filled in all the verses and I think an hour, maybe something like that. And it was like a 15-year-old kid was the lead singer. So I was like, all right, what do I got to do to be that kid, And Teddy was like, great, all right. And the next day the kid came in and sang it. And Bernard Bell, one of Teddy's main collaborators, tweaked it a bit and changed some stuff. And they got the kid to sing the vocal. And next thing I know, it was actually a #1 record. So it's like the first song I was
nice
on was a #1 record. And it was all downhill from there.
All downhill. So did you end up doing more writing with him, or was that just kind of a
I
weird
did.
one-off?
Well, so I think it was right after that, he started doing the second album for his band Guy. And I think, because I don't even know if that had come out yet. So it wasn't a hit yet. It was right around the same time, but he was comfortable with what we did. So he asked me to write some more for the Guy album. I think I'm a co-writer on 3 or 4 songs on that album. And,
Right.
that was a pretty big album.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, yeah. And, I'm forever thankful to Teddy for bringing me in like that. And, it's still nice to get checks 30 years later. It's 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so that kind of was one of the last things I think we did in New York. And then we came out to LA to work with Michael Jackson. So that's when I came to LA. And just at that time, Teddy was setting up, he decided he was going to move to Virginia Beach and build a studio in Virginia Beach. So he was designing a studio while we were working on Michael. And I immediately loved LA. I was just like, this is it. I love it here. I'm not going to Virginia. And I had already started, because we had these hits, I was getting people wanting to hire me as a mixer. And even at that point, I started getting a call from LA and Babyface. So it was like, and that was kind of a direct competitor,
Right.
with Eddie, and Dallas Austin was another one. So I was like, I think, I could start doing other projects rather than just working exclusively for Teddy. And I had hoped maybe that we could continue to work together, but I just knew that he's going to move to Virginia. He's going to get his guys, and that's going to be it. So, but I was like, I'm going to take a chance. I like LA. I want to stay here. And one of the bigger reasons was because this girl at the front desk I was really infatuated with, who is in the other room there now, and with our 2 kids.
You might want to say not against her will. I mean, it's,
no. Well, yeah. She was, but we would spend so much time waiting for Michael to show up at these sessions. I would go up to the front lounge area and talk to this girl who was doing the phones at night. So, I was smitten, and so that was definitely a reason to stay in.
And that worked out. Now, look, you can't just skate over the Michael Jackson session like that. So come on.
Well,
it's a dangerous album.
Yeah, I remember when we were in New York, and Teddy said, "We're going to LA. We're going to work with Michael." And I was like, "Whoa, okay, that's a big deal." And who knew how long it would be? But we spent a couple of months, maybe a couple of weeks, probably, in New York with Teddy, just composing these tracks to be able to play for Michael. So he was inspired, and he started, he was like, okay, we're just going to go in there with, I think there were 15 tracks on this DAT that we printed everything to. We didn't print it on multi-track, right? So he had all of his, he had still, I think, an MPC 60. He had moved to an Atari Stacy as his sequencer, but he had, racks and racks of keyboards and stuff, and all coming up through the console. And rather than making multi-tracks of it, because they were just demos basically. Yeah. We just, kind of made it sound good and printed it on a DAT, brought that out to LA. And I remember the first night coming in, the night before we were supposed to start at Record One, which is right down the street from here. That's where Michael had been working. And I went in the night before just to kind of get a look at the studio and, get myself familiar with what was there. And so I was in the back room there by myself, and the door opens and there's Michael. And I'm like, holy shit, that's Michael Jackson. And, he's, he doesn't look like anybody else, and he's Michael Jackson. And this is kind of Michael Jackson, at his peak, right? This is after.
Absolutely.
Bad, right. Yeah. So, but he was, he was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were." I was like, "No, I'm sorry. I'm Dave. I'm working with Teddy. I just came in to, and he was so nice. He was, so great. And he said hi, and we talked for a bit. And he said, "Oh, I just want to listen to something, but I said, help yourself, I walked out. But for the next day we came in and we just sat with Michael and played these songs on the DAT, right? And the first, what we thought was the best one was first. And I just remember pressing play on the DAT and Michael said, "Hurt Me," because he liked to listen loud, as you know, right?
Yeah.
So we played it super loud. And after it was over, he was like, "I love it. Play it again." And we just played it again and then again. And he was already you could see him getting ideas for it and stuff like that. And then we went through all the rest and he just loved, there was a couple that ended up being that first track ended up didn't get used on Dangerous. It ended up being called Blood on the Dance Floor and got used in the subsequent album.
Well,
which strangely enough, I asked Michael because I heard it a couple of years later when I was working with him on that album. This is like 1997. And that, I heard that song and now it had vocals and everything on it because when we never finished it, we never even put any vocals on it. And I was like, that sounds like exactly like what we brought. And he goes, "It is. That's like, we didn't have them. We never recorded it on a multi-track." So he just
overdubbed the DAT,
transferred it to tracks 1 and 2 and put the vocals and a couple of other, a tambourine or whatever else they put on there. So that was like, that was Blood on the Dance Floor. But we had Remember the Time, I think, was on there. And there might have been another track or two from that 15 that ended up being on the Dangerous album. But I mean, that was like, you worked with Michael, what it was like. It was like nothing else because there was no budget. It was like, you couldn't think of spending as much money as was being spent on a daily basis there. It was insanity, right? I can't, I don't even know. And it would just go on and on and on. We worked on it for, I think, 8 months. We moved from record 1 over to Larrabee because Michael noticed that when we were cutting things on after we'd recorded on the multi-track, and we'd go to 2-inch tape and through the Neve at record 1, that it didn't sound the same as the DAT that he had first heard, which was through an SSL and not having gone to tape. So it had all this punch and, hardness to it. And I explained to him that, a lot of it's this console. And he said, "Well, can we get one of those?" And I said, "Well, we can't really get one of those, but we could go to a studio that has one." And the next thing you know, we're moving the whole shebang over to Larrabee, which was the only studio that I knew in LA, really, because I had worked. So, I'm sure Alan Sides was like, because he just lost. They still worked it. Bill Bottrell was still working.
Right.
Record 1.
And Bruce was somewhere. Right.
Bruce was, at that point, Bruce was not even there yet. I hadn't seen him. He was, I think, at Westlake maybe. And he came in kind of later as we were getting ready to do vocals. We did some vocals. I got, the first time I got to record Michael was like, I think maybe I've told you this story before, but it was on the song "Remember the Time," and he knew that he wanted the chorus to be, which was like, I think it was a 3-part harmony maybe. And now back then we used to sync. We would, for the most part, in R&B world, just do the choruses one time and fly them in, right? And with Teddy, we used to sample them and put them on the S1000 or whatever, and then fly them back in with MIDI. With Ellie and Babyface, we used to use 2 tape machines and do SMPTE offsets and fly them and figure out how many bars, So, but you did it that way, one of those ways. And so I told Michael, "Okay, we'll just go to the first chorus and we'll get." He goes, "Oh, no, play from the top, from the beginning." I was like, "Oh, okay." I mean, maybe he just wants to get into the groove. And we press record, and he goes to the first chorus and does the first part. And I stopped, and he said, "Why did you stop?" I said, "Well, we just need to do the first chorus, then we'll fly it into the other choruses after that." And he looked at me and was like, "Oh, what are you talking about?" Just go back to the beginning again and go all the way to the end. Okay, right. So he did his first part and he got all the way to the end. And then we did, I think another harmony or a double track of that one. And then we just went, one by one. We did about 6 tracks of vocals. And maybe we punched in once or twice. He'd say, "Oh, do that chorus again," and but they were all so tight, and all the breaths were lined up, and it was perfect, right? And in 20 minutes, we were done with the whole song, all the choruses, and I just remember saying to myself, "Well, why don't we do this all the time?"
Because
why
it's
we
not always Michael Jackson, is it?
Thinking that, yeah, exactly, because you don't have Michael Jackson singing every day. So,
God.
But yeah, and I love the fact that, and particularly when Bruce came in later, because I was very only kind of aware of, or at least had been working in this very kind of pseudo modern way of working with, flying things in. And it was kind of the beginnings of cut and paste, it was like, well, you're doing things, you were making arrangements on the MPC 60 and everything was gridded out, so to speak. And whereas, Michael was used to just doing things maybe to a click, that was it. But it was still just, you did the song and there were performances, and, Bill Bottrell, who also was working on that album, who I was already a big fan of. And I remember just getting to meet and hang out with Bill a little bit. That was as much fun to me as working with Michael. He was, I just so loved and working on these Neve consoles. I was so excited to work on a Neve console because at the Hit Factory it was all SSLs and Soundworks was all SSLs. So I didn't really get to work on Neves. And, the studios in LA were so much better, in my opinion, and so much more serious than the ones in New York, at least these dance remix studios that I was working at. So I got to LA and I just fell in love with the studio scene, with the weather, the girl at
Your
the front
future
desk.
wife.
Yeah. So, there was so much to love about LA and the way there was definitely back then, and you can remember this, a difference between records that were made in New York sounded and ones that were made in LA sounded. LA was definitely a lot smoother and professional and slick, and New York, at least certainly Teddy's part of it, was just raw and rough and kind of broken and but it just had this thing that everybody else was like, how do you guys do that? They had no idea what was going on. It just sounded like pots and pans being banged on or something.
So, I mean, did that help you being the New York Teddy Riley guy?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Because that's what I found when I came out here. I was like, I was a New York guy, and I would get calls to do mixes because I could give it this New York sound, So I remember there was a guy at Capitol Records named Scott Folks who was the head of the R&B department there, and he loved what I was doing, and he just kind of put me to work as soon as I said I'm thinking about living here. He's like, oh, okay, So he would like put me up in a hotel for like 2 months, and while I was working at Larrabee, staying at this hotel, and looking for a place to live, because I was like, I'm definitely moving here. So, I didn't know when I moved, I knew separating myself from Teddy was going to be a tough, decision. And I hoped I wouldn't regret it, but I felt like I was getting enough work, and, it worked out. So,
yeah, it certainly did. I mean, having LA and Babyface, that helps.
Yeah.
Helps
well, that was,
fill the gap.
I had started to work with Dallas Austin because with Teddy, one of the last things we did before moving out to come into LA was with the Winans, and we went to Atlanta. I can't remember the studio, but we went to Atlanta to work for a couple of weeks to do an album for the Winans. And this kid, Dallas Austin, who I didn't, he was at the time just another kid. There were people coming in all the time, but then, months later, he called me and said, I'm doing this band on Motown called Boys to Men. I'd like you to mix it. And so we were in New York still. And then he had another band called Another Bad Creation, which was this kids group. And so I was working, I started doing this work for Dallas. And he had a deal with Motown. So he's doing all these Motown acts. And I was like, okay, this guy's really good. He seems to be hiring me, and then he introduced me because he was in Atlanta to LA and Babyface. And so I remember the first time flying down there to work at LA's studio in his house, which was, a beautiful SSL room. I loved that room. It sounded great in there. And we did a remix of his wife's Pebbles, who was an artist also. And, I kind of did my remix kind of thing, which they loved it because, guys who they were working with, like Barney Perkins, who was old school Motown engineer, an amazing engineer, wasn't doing the kind of, whatever, the same thing we were doing in New York, you know what I mean? And John Gass, another amazing engineer, I think they just had a falling out of some kind. So they were looking for a new mixer. So that was kind of my audition. And then the second one I think I did was Jermaine Jackson, Where I Met You.
Right. Yeah. And Barney was on that record too. That's when I
was
first
he?
saw
Yeah,
Barney.
okay. Yeah.
I remember him sleeping while the tape was cycling.
Barney was so great. Gosh, I remember, being intimidated, that Barney Perkins he's a real engineer.
Yes,
he's
absolutely.
Not some kid who doesn't know what he's doing, just, flying by the seat of his pants. Barney could kill it any day.
Yeah, because you do that, especially when you're young, like on any session, especially with an old school guy, you immediately size yourself up like, oh, well, I could do, but yeah, Barney was one of those guys like, nope. Yeah, I can't do that.
Well, to me, it's funny because I always felt on the records I was working on, and so much was because it was so loose and so, like I said, almost broken in a lot of ways, right? Like, it was just untraditional, and I just thought we're doing this all wrong. It's like we got it. So I was trying to make it sound like you Padgham or Steve Lillywhite or some old, and there, I would. If I ever tried to do that, I would get shot down and, no, we ain't doing that, So I was always trying to bring kind of what I thought real record making was to what we were doing. And so it maybe had a little bit of that and mostly what Teddy was doing and what his aesthetic was. But when I would look at guys like Barney or, all the cats out in LA, which, like I said, this is where real records are being made. I thought we're just making stuff for the kids or for the people on the dance floor and stuff like that. It's like, that's not what Quincy Jones is doing. You know what I mean? But, at least that's how the part of me felt. I knew we were having hits, but, no matter, the grass is always greener. You know what I mean?
But I think at the same time, and speaking of Quincy, you got a really early credit on a Quincy record too, which we just blazed over. But the thing that I get listening to what you did is even when it is the early New Jack Swing thing, and it is like, it's not lo-fi, but it's definitely its own thing. The vocals are always world-class sounding, great. So you were getting your engineering in because you would make the vocals sound like a record, no matter what else was going on. And
okay, yeah, I'll take that. Sure. I just remember we used to, so much. I listen to some of those records now, and I hear so much harmonizer on the record. It's like, oh my God, give it a break.
But they'd always work. And some of the other records from that era don't necessarily hold up. Like they're a little too stylized in a way, like you don't get the songs out of them anymore. But every once in a while I hear some of the stuff from back then and I like, okay, that one's really good. That, sometimes you hear some and you're like, okay, well, that was very stylized. And that's the thing that happens in any kind of, genre that is in this little time capsule where, whatever is
the trick, whether it's, gated reverb or, started vocals, whatever it is, it tends to go over the top at some point and gets to be a joke,
Right.
So usually it's the beginning parts where it's just a touch of it where, it makes it special.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So should we jump back? What was the Quincy session you worked on?
That was still in New York, where it was one of those remixes that Teddy was doing for Quincy had an album. I think it was called Back on the Block, I think, or something.
Yeah.
I think that's what it was. I think Saida Garrett was the singer.
Right.
And I think by then we were taking the remixes pretty serious. I think that was one of the ones. So check this out. Sound Tools, right?
Yeah.
Which was what Pro Tools was before it was Pro Tools. It was called Sound Tools. And all you could do was 2-track editing, right? It was a 2-track edit. And by editing, I mean, you chopped up regions and then you could just play them in an order, right? Yeah. I think you could trim the regions, but basically you had regions and then you placed them in an order, and then you would say, okay, I want to hear that back. And you'd press the render button and go have lunch, because it would take like 2 hours for the computer to do it. And then you come back and see, oh, we messed up there. We got to do that again. So the Quincy remix, and there was a remix that we did for Jane Child, that song, I Don't Want to Fall in Love. Do you remember that song?
Yeah.
It was a big hit. And we did a remix of it that was kind of equally a hit for the club scene. It was one of those where they used the edited version. But we did that in those two in Sound Tools. And I just remember thinking, this is great, but gosh, man, this is, it was so much work to try and put it together. And we would have to do like 5 versions that were, 7 minutes long. So
Right.
We spent a week just editing those things, but that's how it was.
Yeah, slightly easier than cutting the 1/2 inch, I guess.
It wasn't easier, that's for sure, but it was a different way of doing it.
Right.
And Teddy was always out. Somebody was always. He had a guy who was constantly, oh, this is the new thing. You should check this out. And he was amazing in that he would never, read a manual or anything. He would you'd give him some piece of equipment and he would just start playing around with it. And before you knew it, he was doing stuff on it that the guys who made it didn't know it could do. You know what I mean? He would just stumble upon some way of using it that was like, oh, okay, yeah, that works. So he was all feel, and he has such great feel. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, he invented a style of music, basically. That's pretty good going.
It is a feel. I mean, but
those records nothing else sounds like them.
Yeah.
And instantly recognizable. And it was big. It wasn't like, oh, there were 4 artists. I mean, it was years of cranking stuff out that all worked. It was all individual, but all definitely fit in that.
Well, and as these things usually go, for years after that, I would get hired by somebody else who was trying to make a record that sounded like a Teddy Riley record. And I would get asked to mix it, and I would start mixing it. And I was like, this doesn't sound anything. They think this sounds like Teddy. And maybe it kind of does, but
it's just like the swing setting on the MPC. You
start to realize, no, this is what the real deal is. This, but that, I went through the same thing where, after working with Babyface for a long time, then you'd get other people who were trying to make Babyface sounding records, and you can't,
yeah,
you come close, but you can't write songs like that. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
you could have the same kind of sounds, but good luck.
Yeah, everybody had a Digital Rhodes. That's
exactly.
That's not going to do it. But so you were working on super high profile stuff like immediately in LA. Too,
yeah, well,
right?
yeah, and in New York, by working with Teddy, all of a sudden I was working on records that were going to get played.
Yeah, I mean Bobby Brown, TLC, and then what's this Portrait record? So your first production credit that I can find.
Really?
Yeah.
Did I get a production credit on that? I don't
Well,
know. If I
according
did.
to the internet, but
I
that
don't
doesn't mean
know.
anything.
But Portrait was a vocal group that was maybe kind of like, Boys to Men came out, right?
Yeah.
And so they were the beginning of this, kind of a cappella vocal group style that was popular for a couple of years. Color Me Bad was another one, and Portrait was another one, yeah, that was a vocal group. Michelangelo was the main guy in that group, and he was really talented.
And a great name.
That was one of those Scott Folks projects. They were
Right.
on Capitol. I did a lot of Capitol projects back then, and Portrait was one of the first, maybe, or yeah,
Right.
yeah, they were really good actually.
And then you got the Bodyguard soundtrack.
Yes, that was with LA and Babyface. Yep. Um, yeah, that was just like I forget how many records it sold, but it was just like, oh,
Is insane.
whoa, how many records can you sell? Yeah.
Yeah, it
So
was a lot.
I don't remember, but yeah, and Whitney and Bobby were just starting to date at that time, I think. So I remember recording a vocal on Whitney, uh, you know, and she just came in and killed it in, I think, one take, maybe two. That was it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And was that just Ellie and Babyface, or was David sort of overseeing that? How would
Foster?
yeah. Did he have anything to do
No,
with those
yeah,
tracks? No.
I just did one song. I mean, David's songs were the main part of the soundtrack, but I can't remember if we did a song called Queen of the Night, which was like a scene when she was on stage kind of a thing. And I don't know if Ellie and Babyface did any other ones on that record, but that was the one that I worked on, one
Right.
song. Yeah. Yeah.
And then
Yep.
the first two TLC records, right?
The first one, I mixed the whole album, which that was Dallas, Austin, and they were on the face. So Dallas and LA were like, partners. And I loved them. I thought they were just great. They were so cool. They were just cool people. And the style that Dallas had come up with was like this very sing song, like a very musical version of hip hop.
Yeah.
And he liked it to be noisy and brash and
Yeah, some a little dirty too.
attitude. It was just about attitude,
Yeah.
and I loved it that they took off. And then the second record, I just at that point, trying to remember if, LA and Face had split. So I was working just with Face, I think, on Red Light Special and what was the other song? Digging on You, I think, was another one. I can't remember. There was like 3 songs, I think, on that record that I mixed. So that was just with Face. Yeah.
Right.
And then I did a couple, and then he started just producing and writing for other people, Tevin Campbell and Tony Braxton was with the two of them. But
right.
yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Belle Biv DeVoe was in there same time.
What's that?
Belle Biv DeVoe around the same time.
Yeah, Belle Biv DeVoe. They were doing a lot. They were at the top of their game too, So
So
maybe a solo record called "The Cool in You." Yeah.
So I'm just curious because obviously you came out of a very specific scene in New York. You get to LA, things are opening up a bit, but you started doing more kind of pop records. But is that because the genre had just turned into pop because it was so popular, or did it feel like a shift in the records you were working on?
You know what I remember? It's funny because I distinctly remember that we were always more watching the R&B charts than the pop charts. And the idea of crossing over was really not, outside of Janet Jackson and Michael Jackson, nobody was really trying to cross over so much, And I remember on Face's solo record, there was a song when I went to mix it. It was just a vocal and a guitar track, and it was this ballad. And I thought, oh, this is really different. This is like a Bill Withers song or something like that, you know. And I loved it. And LA was like, well, we're gonna, you know, this we gotta beef this up. It can't just be vocal and guitar. And I was like, oh, I kind of really like it like that. But you know, so he just put on a bunch of percussion from the MPC 60, and you know, like what we did back then, it was really just whatever, 16 tracks of cabasas, shakers, congas, triangles, you know, just from start to finish, you know. And then in the mix, you just decide which to bring in where. But it went on the album like that, and that was my favorite song on the album. It's called "When Will I See You Again," and when the album came out, people started talking about that song and the fact that it was just this guitar and vocal, which at that time there were no R&B records that were just a vocal and a guitar. Guitar was not an instrument you heard on R&B records.
No.
You know, it was
little
if it
samples,
didn't come out in MPC 60, it didn't exist, right? So they worried, they thought that it could cross over to the pop charts, but they didn't want to. They knew they couldn't put it on the R&B chart, so they did a remix of it that was a traditional Babyface, you know, big backgrounds and the Rhodes sound and drum machine. And so they released it kind of simultaneously to pop and R&B, and it really took off on the pop chart. I think it was a #1 record. I can't remember. Or like
it was huge.
5.
It's got to have been close.
But it was, and it kind of opened the door to this, what they ended up calling neo soul after that. You know what I mean? So it kind of so that all of a sudden now was crossing over, and this idea that, you know, this kind of lighter, softer version of R&B that wasn't the New Jack Swing dance club thing could work on the pop charts. And so, you know, like I said, I think for 5 years after that, I was doing nothing but Babyface type ballads, you know.
Right.
Yeah. And but you know, the key to that was they were great songs. So that's a great song.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you got two pretty traditional artists right in the middle of that, with Gladys Knight and Diana Ross too, right? Which is, you know.
Yeah, you know, so I forget about these things because they're just one song, you know, like a radio mix, or maybe one song on an album that one producer, because that was also the beginning of having multiple producers on a record. You know, before 90 something, an album pretty much had one producer, mostly one producer and another producer doing a couple of songs. And you get to about the mid 90s, late 90s, and all of a sudden you had all these production teams and everybody kind of battling to try and get the first single. Yeah. And, you know, the record company.
And if you think about it, Michael sort of invented it because, you know, it was just Quincy and Rod. And then all of a sudden it was everybody on the planet.
Right. Yep. I remember working on the Michael Dangerous album, and I had already just started working with LA and Face. And this was towards the end of the Dangerous album. And he was still calling in producers, you know, David Foster, Walter A. And he called in LA and Babyface. And I was over at Record One working with Teddy or something. And I just remembered, I was like, I can't be seen. If Teddy's there and LA and Face walk in and they say, hey to me, and Teddy sees that, I'm dead meat. So I was like, I gotta get out of here somehow. And, you know, then thankfully they never crossed paths. I didn't get in the middle. I just remember, ooh. And it might've been around that time of doing She Said,
right?
She Said, which was another reason I didn't want to, you know, let it be known that I was just, you know, on both teams.
Well, you know, just two of the biggest teams on the planet at the time. So that's pretty good. It's pretty good. So look, there's tons of stuff sort of through that part of your career, but there was one
We're setting quite a pace here. We're about an hour. We're still in 1990.
Well, we're mid 90s. But I want to take us a little closer to the end of the 90s, because I was keeping track of like all these projects, and not that there's anything wrong with any, like they're all like huge records, but it's very much like, yep, this is what you're doing, this is what you're doing. Then all of a sudden you do Lily Hayden's record.
Yeah.
So what's the story with that?
You know what? I remember thinking to myself that I'm getting pigeonholed into being this R&B guy, and I don't want to be just pigeonholed doing, you know, records that want to sound like Babyface or Teddy Riley or whoever. And so I just kind of, I guess, and I put it out to my manager, but I certainly in my mind was like, I want to start doing some different kind of records, you know, for me. And yeah, I don't remember what year Lily's album was, but
97 it came out.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, I was still doing R&B records then for sure, but I think the Spice Girls was right around there.
Yeah, Spice Girls, more Whitney, Color Me Bad. That's all right in that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So, you know, the Spice Girls were really pop. So that certainly kind of moved me into a bit more of the pop, you know, that ended up like being Christina Aguilera kind of records and things like that. But yeah, you know, remember the 90s was also, there was so much grunge, and the Seattle sound was just the thing that everybody, so I remember like, you know, digging Pearl Jam and Nirvana and Smashing Pumpkins and all those, you know, great bands at the time, wanting to do records with guitars or with, you know, real drums as opposed to drum machines and stuff, you know? So I was definitely on the hunt and trying to broaden my palette, you know? So Lily's was one of the first. If that was 97, that's probably about then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, and you know, I also, you know, that music is trendy anyway. So new things are popping up, and I don't know, if an opportunity comes around, you just want to take it, you know, if it's going to broaden your sensibility somewhat. So
right. Well, and so that, I mean, then the next one is the first John Doe record you worked on, because that's the next year.
That's right. That was around the same time.
A bunch of records with him. So how did that? Because it's hard to not be pigeonholed when you're so good at the really popular thing that you're doing. So how does it come about where it's like, no, it's not even like, I'm going to mix a John Doe record. It's like, no, I'm going to produce it. I'm going to be super involved. Like, I mean, you're not just showing up to engineer.
Well, you know what? The reason John and I got together was because we had the same manager, Ron de Blasio. And, you know, like managers like to do, they, you know, they'll like to have some, you know, if they have an artist and then they have an engineer or a mixer or a producer, they like to put them together because
bigger piece of the pie
and the whole thing. Yeah. So, but they said, would you be interested in working with X? And I was like, yeah, are you kidding me? That's exactly what I'd like to do, you know? So there was, this is a funny story, actually. There was Major League 2, I think, the movie. They had used the song Wild Thing for one of the Charlie Sheen character. And it was a big part of the first movie, right? And they wanted to use it again in the second movie, but they didn't want to pay for it, right? Because I guess it was more expensive this time. And so management said they want you guys to record Wild Thing. And we said, okay, great. And so I met with John, and John was like, well, you know, we don't want to do Wild Thing. You know, let's come up with a different version of it. So we ended up recording this kind of almost like the Trogs version of it, right? And it was a kind of a bit more beatnik vibe to it. And it wasn't this big metal thing, which was what the original was. And we handed it in, and of course, the movie people were like, what the hell is this? This is a wild thing. And, they didn't tell us that they wanted us to basically just re-record they thought that that's what X would just do. Meanwhile, they didn't know this. And I don't think I'm saying anything that John hasn't said in public before. It was like, they hated that production on that record because it was like, sounded nothing like X. And it was like layers and layers of guitars and big drums and, so the last thing they wanted to do was do that again. So anyway, I think we ended up recutting it again, but still not to that. They were not going to do that again. So, we cut it twice, 2 different kind of versions, and they said no. So they ended up having to pay whatever the fee was for the real, for the original version. But John and I hit it off, and kudos to him for like when it was time to work on a solo record. And I don't think he had a deal at the time, but he just wanted to do some demos basically. And so I said, come on over to my house. I've got a little studio set up. And he said he wanted to kind of incorporate some of the drum machine-y kind of stuff, and I thought, great. So, I just kind of laid down some drums to whatever his songs were. And we recorded them on ADATs, and I, and it ended up being an EP that was the first thing we worked on, and he enjoyed it. I loved it. And for me, this was like the first time that I was working with the kind of artist that I really always wanted to work with, which is just, if anybody doesn't know who John Doe is, or X, you
go have a listen.
Yeah, go have a listen and check out the artistry and the balls of somebody like John. So I loved it, and John and I have become really best friends, and we've done, I don't even know how many records we've made together. I think like 8, something like that.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah. So maybe there'll be another one soon, I hope.
Excellent.
I love that. Yeah, he is the coolest guy on the planet.
Right.
Yeah. Him and Ringo.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Don't get ahead of yourself, pal.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Yeah.
So, all right, but so then this brings us up to 1999, which, forgetting about the Prince song, is a pretty gigantic year for you. I mean, you've already had a gigantic almost decade leading up to this, but that's Christina Aguilera, the Savage Garden, which I don't think people really remember how big that was then, but that was gigantic really for a minute. Yeah. And most importantly, the Macy Gray record.
Right.
All happened in 99. So I don't know if there's anything you want to say about Christina or Savage Garden or whatever, but then we're definitely going to talk about the Macy record because that's a big deal.
The Christina thing,
and this is Genie in a Bottle for people who don't know. I mean, this is big.
Genie in a Bottle. So Ron Fair, who I don't even know if I had ever worked with Ron before, but I had certainly kind of talked with him about working on some projects. But he suggested that I mix this song that he had, that David Frank and Steve Kipner had written and produced. So, and I hadn't worked with them before. And so I didn't really know what I was in for, but I came in, mixed the song, and David and Steve were great. And I thought it was really cool. And Ron liked how it came out and asked me to mix subsequent songs for other producers who I had never worked with before for that project. Guy Roche, trying to remember who else. But, so I ended up mixing what ended up being all the singles from that album. But the first one was Genie in a Bottle. And I just remember not thinking anything, because you never know, there's always the A&R guy is going to be hyping it and say, this is going to be great. This is going to be great. And, and by that point I had learned, been deflated enough times to know that don't get your hopes up that anything's actually even going to come out, let alone be heard. And all of a sudden that song came out and it just like kind of immediately went to the top of the charts. And and I was like, well, okay, then we got to, I think it was a number one song, was it? I
Oh, it
can't
had to
remember.
be.
Yeah,
Even if it wasn't, let's say it was. I mean, it was
yeah,
huge.
yeah. And I think Savage Garden was right around at the same time. I think,
Yeah.
'cause if I'm not yeah, I think they were actually at one point like really close to each other on the charts or something like that. So yeah, those were, and that was my first time. Savage Garden was working with Walter Afanasieff, who was, a great producer. And, at that point he was one of the top guys, if not the top guy, doing all these Mariah Carey
Yeah.
records, Boys to Men, Kenny G. Like you go to Walter's studio and every record on the wall sold like 15 million, 20 million, it's just like nothing below 10 million, nothing, not done.
Well, those are in the bathroom, the
Yeah.
below 10 million.
Yeah. So, yeah. And the Macy Gray project, I remember, was kind of part of my thing about wanting to branch out a bit and not do such R&B, even though it was an R&B record. When I met with Andy Slater, the producer, he told me the kind of record he wanted to make, which was like a Sly Stone, like an old school Stevie Wonder 70s kind of sounding album, but he wanted to use guys like Matt Chamberlain and John Bryan and some of the guys from the Wallflowers, and I was like, count me in. I want, and he wanted me to record it, which that was one of the main reasons I really wanted to do it, because I just got thrown into the mixing thing from kind of the beginning with Teddy, and that's all I did for about 10 years almost. So the idea of actually recording a kit and a band was like, oh, I can't wait to do this. So we're going to work at Sunset, where I'd never worked at Sunset before. And, then we're going to go to Henson for mixing. And or at the time, I think it was still A&M. And so for me, I was like, I'm in. And it was a long haul. It was a tough record to make. But all through it, I just thought, this is my favorite record I've ever worked on.
Right.
So, and it's still one of my favorite records that I've worked on. I loved her voice. I had actually met Macy before that. I forget what I was working on, but I was at Larrabee mixing something, and she was making a record that never came out. She was on Atlantic, and I remember walking by and hearing it loud. It was a rock record, and I thought it sounded like Bon Scott and AC/DC. I was like, what is that? And I remember it was around the Super Bowl, and I was out in the hall and I was talking to somebody about putting a bet on the Super Bowl that, I had a bookie who was, a friend of a friend who was taking bets. And she must have heard that. And then like a couple of months later, I get a phone call on my at home, and she said, I pick it up. Hello. I was like, hey, this is Macy. I met you at the studio. You still got that bookie? So she's like, I was like, what you mean? And she's like, you at the Super Bowl, you had a bookie. So she's really into sports and betting too. So that was meeting Macy. That's before we even met. And I don't even know if I ever told her that story actually, but yeah, I loved it. I loved making that record. It was tough, but I did stuff that I never did before. And the other thing was like Andy, the producer, didn't want any Pro Tools. It was all going to be on tape, and all analog, no drum machines, none of that stuff. So it ended up being a little bit of that, but not really. And we had like 4 24 track machines locked together, when so many overdubs. And this is, obviously pre-Pro Tools or just about the beginning of Pro Tools. And you really couldn't figure out what you had until we got to the mix and started muting stuff, because you weren't going to,
Yeah.
things were not arranged. So it was all arranged in the mix. And this is where my kind of dance remix days, I think, came to the rescue, because all of it was in the automation, you know?
Right. I can't
Yeah.
imagine having to wait for 4 machines to lock, though.
Yeah.
Oh my God. You'd have to roll
Yeah.
it like 8 bars before whatever
Yeah,
you wanted to
exactly.
listen to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what made it tough? Just because it was so expansive, but on tape, or?
We spent a long time working on it, just overdubbing, and just the overdubs went on and on forever and ever. And you know, Andy, I think he'll tell you, like, he's like, it's good, but is it can it be better? You know, and he'll think, well, what if Patrick Warren plays the piano rather than John Bryan, or what if so and so plays, you know? And so you could have something that you think is great, and he'd say, like, no, we're going to do that over again. It's like, really? We're going to do that again? This is fantastic. And, you know, so maybe you'd try another piano track with so-and-so, and it wouldn't be good. And you see, it was great. And you try, and then 3 guys later, okay, that was better. So, you know,
Right.
So it's that kind of a thing, you know, and then maybe when you get to the mix, you'd use the bridge from so-and-so's piano performance and the rest of it from another guy's, you know, and it was kind of a lot of that.
So it's the Steely Dan thing.
It is. It was the Steely Dan kind of way of making records. Yeah.
So those mixes must have taken a long time then.
It took, I mean, I think I worked on it for 9 months, which at that time was a lot. It was certainly a lot for me. I never worked on one record for 9 months. Never.
Right.
It's out of Michael Jackson, but that was on and off for 9 months, you know? So, yeah. But like I said, I just, you know, I loved it. It pushed me to do things that I never had done before or would have done.
So who would you say are sort of your mentors for recording? Because, I mean, like you say, you'd spent the first 10 years of your career maybe recording vocals, but that's about it, right?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I didn't really have a mentor for
So
recording.
is it just like reaching back to what you learned at Berkeley and what you've been
Yeah,
seeing? And
yeah, for the most part, and experimenting and knowing the sound that I want in my head and figuring out how to get it, you know?
And I know, like,
Yeah.
you're a gigantic scholar of recording history, and especially with the Beatles records, but were you at that point? Like, because the resources weren't as available, but...
Right, yeah, exactly. We didn't have the internet to go look up how, you know, this record was recorded or whatever. You heard stuff, but I was definitely interested in it, but I didn't have the experience of, you know, just knowing if I put, you know, these mics here, it's going to sound like this or whatever. It was a bit of experimenting for me, you know, but you work at Sunset, you know, Studio 3 there, right? Is that the Studio 3, the small one, the Prince room?
The one across the courtyard, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, you know, it's hard to make it sound bad on that console in that room. So,
well, and I'm sure, like most engineers, you go in there and you ask the assistant, hey, where'd the last guy set up drums?
Yeah, exactly. What's the best part of the room to set the drum? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, that's true, though. They do know.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely, because they've watched people do everything. So it's the ones who ask that they love. So, yeah, I mean, it's. I guess it's the perfect record. It's obviously high pressure to sort of learn again while doing that record, but also that record had the budget and the resources to be able to do it.
And great musicians. I mean, I just remember you know, there was a song on there called Still, which was like a ballad. And I think it was one of the first tracks that we recorded at Sunset. And it was like, you know, Matt Chamberlain and Patrick Warren and Greg Richling from the Wallflowers and Jay Joyce, an amazing guitar player and producer. And I think that was it. And then Macy singing. And, you know, it was just one of those takes that when it was over, you just were like, okay, it's not going to get better than that. The vocal was the vocal. She never sang it again.
Right. And you thought, man, this record's going to be done in a week.
Well, yeah, maybe at that point I probably did. Yeah. But, yeah, it was, you know, that was the kind of moment I was hoping for, those things that I never got before, which was capturing a moment, you know? and like there was nothing there before, and now you just recorded it, listen to that, So, yeah, it gave me a real appreciation for the history of recorded music and kind of getting deeper into that. I think that was the beginning of my interest in how the real guys did it.
The real guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Meanwhile, you've been making hit records for 10 years already. So, you were a real guy.
But it's a different thing.
Yeah, I know. This is
I
like
knew
back
that
to the Barney.
This is not something I do, all the time. So, but I know I can do it. So let's just do it.
Right. Right.
Recording strings. That was my first time recording a string, session. So I knew I could do it. Didn't know I could do it.
But you did it.
Yeah.
And there you go. So, all right, I don't know the timeline on this. So when did everything with Larrabee and the Pass and all that stuff start happening?
Larrabee and the Pass, let me think. I guess it was around that time, around 99. So I had been working almost exclusively at Larrabee, which is, I started there on that Michael Jackson record. And then I found it for the most part, I worked in the West Hollywood room in Studio B there. That was kind of my room for a good 5 years. And then when they got J series consoles, I moved over to the North Hollywood facility and I started mixing there. So I had a really great relationship with Kevin Mills, the owner there. And I remember he called me one day saying, "Hey, there's a studio for sale. I'm thinking about buying it. Will you go check it out for me?" And he was in Australia, so he couldn't see it himself. And, and he knew me well enough and I knew him well enough. So the studio at the time was called Andorra.
Yeah.
And it was a facility with 2 rooms, a big tracking room and a mix room, both with 8078s in it. And I walked in there and, I was impressed. Gave Kevin I basically told Kevin, I was like, "Look, if you're interested in buying it, this is exactly the kind of studio that you don't have. This is everything that Larrabee's not," Larrabee was for the most part all SSLs and mostly mixing, So I was like, if that's what you want to do, this is the perfect facility because, people like Rick Rubin and I think already at that point, Tom Petty had recorded the Wildflowers record in there and a bunch of great records made in there. So Kevin bought it and Jamie, my wife, was at the time the studio manager. And so she was managing all the Larrabees, which at that point was after Kevin bought this building, there was 3 Larrabee buildings.
East, West, and North.
East, West, and North. And so this was now dubbed Larrabee East with the 2 Neves. And so Larrabee had it for, I think, maybe 5 years. I think that was about 98. And I can't remember when basically he decided he wanted to sell it. And I think maybe having 3 facilities was more than he needed. So Jamie said, "I think we should buy it." And I thought she was crazy. And she probably was. But, I said, "Well, look, let's look at the numbers and see if it makes any sense." And we did. And so I thought, okay, even though, let me think what year this was. This is probably about 2004, 2005, something like that.
Right.
And the studio business had already started to change. And I had already started working here at the way station. So I didn't need a studio like Larrabee, But anyway, we ended up buying it with a couple of partners. And, did you ever work there? I don't know if you ever worked there.
Yeah, I did a few smaller sessions there, but then that's where Ryan mixed half of the Chili Peppers record that I mixed the other half of. So I was in and out of there a lot, but I don't think I did that many sessions there, unfortunately.
Yeah, Ryan. So the Chili Peppers was one of, Rick Rubin had been making a lot of records in there. And
Yeah,
I
Dave
think
Bianco loved it in there, right?
Dave Bianco loved it. Dave Sardi liked it. Bill Bottrell, one of my heroes, was there all the time. So kind of, I kind of knew that if these are the guys booking this room on a regular basis, this is as good as I think it is. So, we had that room. I still basically worked here at Way Station while Jamie booked out the rooms there. And it was nice. Every once in a while I would go mix something there or record. I would track something there. But for the most part, I was here and it was just being booked out to other clients. And there was a lot of great records got made there. And then after about, I don't know what year it was, but maybe after about 5 or 6 years, this guy, Yoshiki, who's a Japanese artist and producer.
Gigantic.
He's huge. Out of nowhere, he kind of said that he wanted to make an offer and to buy it. And I said to my partners, I said, we'd be stupid not to take this, particularly at that time, which was, I think, about, I don't remember when it was, about 2011, maybe 2012, something like that.
Right.
So, the writing was on the wall when we bought the place, but then by the time we sold it, it was like, it's tough business, as you know. It's only tougher, So I was happy about that. And I kind of took some of my favorite gear from there and brought it up here to the Way Station because I was like, well, if I'm not going to have the pass, we called it the pass, to track things, I should bring some of that stuff up here to be able to track up here. So I kind of converted my studio here a bit more into a tracking room. And so no regrets on that. But I do miss that. The big room in particular was just an amazing sounding room.
Right. And is Yoshiki still there? Is it still?
He is.
Yeah.
As far as I know, he's still there. Yeah.
Right. So it still exists anyway.
Yeah, it's still a studio. Yeah, I don't think he's changed,
Right.
outside of the decor. I don't think he's changed the rooms.
Right. Yeah, one of my not first gigs, but early on, Eddie Delane and I did a bunch of remixes for Yoshiki. So it was kind of the LA version of what you were doing in New York.
Right.
Very funny. So, all right. So through all this, we wanted to talk about Way Station because you built that pretty early on. But when did you put the SSL in when you built it, or was that a next generation?
Basically when Jamie got pregnant and my daughter was born, I thought to myself, because it had been about 5 years here at that point, and the studio was kind of here already.
Because
Julian
it's
Leonard,
a house in LA, and every house in LA has a studio.
Well, that was one of the points of interest when I bought it, but I didn't really use it as a studio because I was working at Larrabee and other rooms, and but then when our daughter was born, I thought, well, what if I treated this more like a real studio, and I could work here sometimes so that I'm just not gone all the time, And so I in my mind, I thought, all right, let me kind of do what I have at Larrabee. So I got an SSL 6000E and, brought in my outboard gear and stuff. And so built the room here, and I didn't expect to work here all the time, but this was in 2002. And so by about 2003, I was doing pretty much everything here, and there was no reason to go somewhere else. And I was quite happy about that. I was a little afraid, a little apprehensive that my studio would be intruding on my private time, but I didn't, I quickly didn't, I saw that wasn't going to be a problem. So, yeah. And, having a wife who was a studio manager who knows everything that goes on and what to expect, that made it easy, So, after about a year, I was doing everything here, and It's been, almost 20 years, 18 years. Yeah.
Yeah, because why not? I mean,
Yep.
there's
Yeah, the big SSL is not here anymore. I actually just redid it again now. There was a small SSL matrix was in here up until about a month ago, and then now I've just put in an S4, an Avid S4.
right, right,
Yeah, and
and a lot
there's
of
the
speakers.
on the ceiling. Yeah.
Well, we can talk about that, but I want to talk about a couple things before we get to that because first of all, you finally worked with Ringo.
Oh man, that was around the same time. That was 2002.
Yeah, 2002 was the record
I
probably
think it
came out
came
in
out. Yeah,
2003.
yeah.
Yeah,
We ended in like October of
because you're
2002.
still you're a Beatles freak through all this.
Oh
It's not
man,
like you ever stopped liking the Beatles. So
it was unbelievable. I remember I don't remember what studio I was at, but I was at a studio and just taking a break, reading the Music Connection. Remember Music? It's still around, but it's like a little trade magazine. And it tells you about all these projects that are going on. And I caught a blurb that said Ringo Starr, Mark Hudson is producing an album for Ringo Starr on Koch Records. And I think without thinking, I called my manager and I said, hey, Mark Hudson's doing a record for Ringo. I don't know if it's done, if they haven't mixed it yet or what, but if they haven't mixed it, I'd love to mix it. Can you find out? And he called me back in like half an hour and said, all right, you got a meeting tomorrow with Mark Hudson at a restaurant over by the Village where he has his own studio. So I go and meet Mark the next day. And of course he's a bigger Beatle nut than I am. And we immediately hit it off because he saw what a Beatle freak I am. And, he brought me over to the studio. He played me some stuff and said, we're going over to England in 2 weeks. I think you should come with us to mix this. And I was like, you're kidding me. So 2 weeks later, we're I just remember we getting in the car and we're out, in the country out in, I forget the name of the town. But anyway, staying at Ringo's house for 2 months in the guest room there. And, Ringo and Barbara with their horses and, having us up for dinner and breakfast. And we're mixing at David Gilmour's studio, Astoria, on the Thames, on the River Thames. And so it was like a dream come true. It was just, I couldn't believe it. I was just pinching myself the whole time. And I still pinch myself about it just because I think Ringo is probably just one of the coolest people in the world. And I never laughed or had so much fun in the studio. It was just fun, joking, creativity the whole time. It was just the best. It really was.
right.
Didn't want to end. Yeah.
And did you let on that you were as big a Beatle freak to Ringo right away, or like
No,
how do
well,
you
they
handle
did
that?
say beforehand, it's like, don't bring up the Beatles unless he does. And so I didn't. And, but maybe I don't know, maybe you could tell I know all the references and the songs and, and stuff like that. And, maybe Mark said he's one of us. I don't know,
Right.
but yeah, it was so great. And we got to, it was just around the time that they were doing the concert for George. Did you ever see the concert for
Yeah.
George? So we're coming up on the 1 year anniversary of his death. This is like in November. So they were doing rehearsals for that. And Ringo would come after the rehearsals and come down to the studio and listen and hang out. And so we had the live room. There was a small live room set up just in case he happened to bring some of the friends back and that kind of thing. So nobody ever actually came back with him, but since the stuff was set up, he would just jam in the back. He and Mark would sit back there and write songs and just jam and play, and we'd record it. And there's actually one song where they were like, we need bass. You want to play bass on this? So I was like, are you kidding me? Yeah. And they're like, well, we need a Hofner. We don't have a Hofner. Dick Gilmore didn't have a Hofner. So we went to Denmark Street, went and picked out a Hofner, and came back, and I played bass on this demo that, surprisingly enough, I think 3 years later, maybe something like that, it ends up showing up on one of Ringo's records. And they used my bass part, which is crazy enough. They changed the key. They dropped it down, like I think a minor third or something like that. So they transposed the bass part to like down that far. So
instead of replaying it.
Yeah. So anyway, I love to this day that I played bass with Ringo on one of his tracks.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was so great. Like I said, there was nothing but fun. It was just.
And was that Ringo Rama or?
Ringo Rama, yeah. And then we did another record after that here at Mixing at the Way Station, an album called Choose Love, which was the album after that.
Right.
Yeah. And, and then Ringo would come up here and have a listen, have lunch, tell us stories. He would tell stories, which he's just hoping, don't say anything to make it stop.
Right. Don't mention the Beatles.
Don't say anything. Yeah. Let him go.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the dream,
It's my dream, that's for sure. It was emotional sometimes. There was a song on that album, which was Ringo's song for George. And this was heavy at the time with the Concert for George in the air, And when we were staying at Ringo's house, there's 3 guest rooms in the guest house, and there's the John room, the Paul room, and the George room, and each one had like a picture of one of the other 3 above the bed, and I was staying in the George room, and I just remember coming home after mixing the song Never Without You, and Ringo would come down after the rehearsals for the Concert for George and had a listen, and it was obviously really emotional for him and us. And then he said, thank you. And I get home and I'm like, well, I get back to the house and I was just like, how the hell did I get here? This is like, it just is freaking me out. I just, it felt amazing. It felt amazing to help him.
Right.
On this song. Yeah. So, yeah.
Good stuff. It's amazing. It's amazing. So look, right around the same time, you also, some other up and coming guy named Mick Jagger.
Yeah, that was fun too. Yeah. That was over at the record plant for his solo record. I forget how many solo records he's had now, but this was, I think, his second one. And
a few, because I mean, there was the disco one. Yeah.
This was around, what year is that? Around the same time, 2002?
2001, yeah.
2001, yeah. All right, so yeah, he was so great, and I mixed a couple of songs, one of which ended up on the record, but he's a gentleman. He didn't tell too many stories, but and he wasn't there as much hanging out. Ringo was like for 2 months, just kind of hanging out. But Mick was just a few days, and him coming down to have a listen and give the thumbs up or down. So yeah, I mean, what's so cool about these heroes of ours, and particularly working with them late in their careers after they've been through everything. They have seen everything. They can size people up, I think, immediately. They can, they know how to, just nothing's gonna surprise them, So they're just super cool. You know what I mean? They have an ego, but you really don't feel it as you're working with them. And you're like, this is Mick Jagger. This is Ringo. How are they seeming so normal and cool? I don't understand it. What's going on? Yeah.
All right. Well,
you've worked with someone,
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, because it's, and I think it's always been my what's worked out well for me in the studio is never treating anybody like, oh my God, because that never goes well. And I think, like, especially with someone like Michael, I mean, the very first, I'll tell a story now just because I never tell stories.
Yeah.
But so I was working on the history record, but I'd been brought in by other people to set up the synclavier and things. So I saw Michael and I knew him from the Dangerous tour because I was on that tour for a year and a half.
Oh.
So we knew each other, but like we didn't talk much.
Right.
And then finally there was this time where they said, hey, look, Michael wants to have lunch with him. Come and eat. Like, it won't just be the two of you, but like we'll eat in the control room. We'll have food in the control room. That'll be fine. And so we got Chinese food because I can't remember the name of the place, but at Hit Factory, there was a Chinese place around the corner. Did the sesame chicken, kind of glazed with sesame seed. Loved that stuff.
You remember what you had.
Oh, God, yeah. Well, the reason I remember the chicken is because I come into the control room and it's like, well, I've known this guy for years now, but still, I'm pretty nervous and whatever. And I immediately dump my food all over the floor, my feet and his feet. And it's this sticky glazed chicken thing. And I thought, well, I guess I'm going home tomorrow. But he thought it was hilarious.
Really?
So,
yeah.
So, but it's, if you treat them like that's just treating someone like they're not normal, and then that makes everybody uncomfortable.
Yeah, you need to spill the sesame chicken on the star to make them...
Exactly. Maybe you don't have to go quite that far. You could do it metaphorically, but got the guy's feet all sticky. So look, there are two records right at the same time as this, which are... One of them makes more sense than the other, but the one that makes less sense is the Chris Botti record.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm curious, like, how'd that come about? Because also, I mean, you put one of the tracks on your list. Like, it's a great sounding record.
Yeah.
Was this a Walter A type thing, or what did that come from?
No, this is actually a guy. His name Steve Lindsay is the producer, who's a great producer, and we've become really good friends over the years. I think that was the first project we did together, and I can't remember if he hired me or if the A&R guy hired me, Yves Beauvais, who one of the great A&R guys. But anyway, I don't know, they thought for some reason I would be a good guy to mix that record, and Steve was one of those LA producers, one of the guys who can make slick, amazing sounding records, that I always admired. And so, I was, and it was also, it was a jazz. It wasn't straight jazz, but there's some straight jazz elements on it. And, but it's, an instrumental record, and I'm a big jazz fan. I love jazz. And Chris is an amazing player.
Yeah.
But he's, trying to cross over into the pop, kind of poppier side of things. But there's that one song on that record, which is, I did put on that list, which is a Leonard Cohen song, A Thousand Kisses Deep, which I remember when it came to that song, because, maybe that was the fifth or sixth song we got into mixing wise. And I think most of the other stuff had drum machines and kind of, standard poppier production on it. But this one came up and it was a band in a room. It was like, Smokey Hormel and Joey Warnaker, and I don't remember who was playing bass, and Chris, and I don't remember who played piano, but it was just an amazing band in the room. And no tricks, like a jazz record. I just always loved how, I love the song, love the performance. I love the feel of that track. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
I love jazz records. We do so many records we make, and certainly I've done at that point almost all the records I made are like productions, where it's not an actual moment in time. It's a manufactured beast to give you the illusion maybe of it, everybody being in the room. But like my favorite records to listen to when I'm just hanging out on Sunday afternoon, for the most part, I listen to stuff pre 1960, because there's no overdubs,
right.
For the most part. It's just a performance, and it's being captured, and it's people in a room, and they're great. They didn't get to that point without being great. You couldn't make a record and you couldn't be allowed in the doors of the studio unless you had already proven that you were worth putting the mics up for, you know? So those are the records that I love. And, you know, we after 65 or so, not that there's not amazing music after that point, but certainly, you know, almost 100% of them have overdubs and studio trickery and you know, lots of, you know, things that aren't, you know, whatever you want to use, real or organic.
Yeah.
But so I love records like that, you know. Everyone, I love getting to make, every once in a while I get to do something like that, you know.
Right.
It's always fun.
Well, okay, so here's a record that's the opposite of that from that same year. Andrew WK.
Oh my God, that is about the opposite as you can get. That's right. As a matter, I think I did those back to back. I think I did Chris's album first, right? So coming from this place, and then to Andrew, who, by the way, I think he hired me just because he thought my name was cool. He told me that.
That sounds like him.
Yeah, right. But I tell you, that guy is so talented and so driven, and he's an inspiring human being. He's an amazing guy. But so I'll tell you the story on that. I was over at Scream Studios where I had just done the Chris Botti record, and set to start. And I walk in, and Andrew's there, and he's got a setup in the live room with another engineer. And they say, okay, here's the first song. We just finished the vocals for it. And I'm actually going to be working in the live room and do the vocals for the next song that you're going to get tomorrow. I was like, okay. And the song had, I don't know, over 100 tracks, right? The first two of which were rough mix, right?
Yeah.
And he said, that's, you got to use that. That's in there, right? So there's a rough mix, and then all the individual tracks that, you know, are all going together. And there were just, you know, if there was a guitar riff that went, you know, down, 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 right, whatever it was, there would be a main guitar part doing that. There would be single stringed guitar versions of that. There would be an octave above, an octave below. There would be saxophones. There would be, you know, there would be a bass, a distorted bass. There would be like everybody doing
12
that riff.
pianos.
Yeah, 12 pianos. You know, the drums were just bombastic. And then the vocals were that on steroids. There would probably 50, 60 tracks of screaming vocals, just like he's screaming at the top of his lungs. And there's 20 tracks of one part, and then another 20 tracks of an answer part to that. And I put it up, and it's just like this, you know, I've only gotten up to track 16, and already it's like, whoa, being bombarded with sound. And, you know, his thing was that he wanted it to sound like there's a million people on stage, right? And I say, well, you succeeded in that, right? So, but anyway, so I'm mixing this song, and he's out there doing the vocals for the next song. And we finished the first song, and then I come in the next day, and he's still in the live room, hasn't gone home. He's just finished screaming his lungs out for the song I'm about to mix that day. And it went on like that for, you know, I worked 12, 13 days. And, you know, after the second or third day, I realized it's like, there's no way he's going to be able to do this many vocals every day for, you know, the next 2 weeks, which is, I think we had 2 weeks booked. So I told the studio manager, it's like, you know, we might maybe get through the week, and then we're probably going to have to fit something else in here, and then we'll come back, because there's no way he's going to be able to sing all that. Nope. He every day he would scream and scream and scream. Didn't go home, I think, maybe for a couple of times. Him and the engineer out there working harder than I was mixing. And, you know, and then I went and saw him, and during that he went and played a gig somewhere in Hollywood. And I remember, you know, he had a band of about, you know, 20 guys on stage. And then at the end of I think for the last song, he just said, everybody come up on stage. And so there was like 150 people on the stage with him, all just singing the party, whatever party song they were playing, because it's
Yeah.
all about the party with Andrew. Yeah.
And so how was he about the mixes? I mean, was it relatively easy? Because he's super
Yeah.
specific.
I don't remember it being any kind of, I remember it just being a song a day and, just making it as big sounding as was possible, which wasn't too hard because it already was big,
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't remember it being, I was just amazed. He played all the drums on the,
On the
keyboard.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, he's really an incredible talent. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and you get, because of the lyrics that stick out, everybody thinks he's just like a bro.
Yeah,
and it's
kind of meathead kind of anthem.
And it's not at all. It's all about saving the planet and being good people. Right. It's everything is inspirational and pretty deep.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Yep.
And I love especially like the album cover, they're doing the photo shoot for it. And he's just like, it's not enough. There's not enough. Like the Bloody Nose album cover, he actually ran into a wall to give himself a bloody nose to do it. Not makeup, not, exactly. And it was spur of the moment. Like, this is not happening yet.
Right, exactly. This isn't what it should be.
Yeah.
Let me do whatever it is that needs to be done to make it what it should be. Includes putting my face in a brick wall. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, amazing.
You worked with him.
I did one song after that first record for a film. I can't remember. Maybe it was a South Park movie. I don't remember what movie it was, but I did one track and Rick was producing it. But it was just me and Andrew for a week at Sound City. And I started, this is when Pro Tools first could really handle 96K. So I'm like, I'm doing this thing at 96K. I ran out of tracks in 4 hours. Right. Yeah. So the first night I had to sample rate convert that session down to 48. And then we were still dumping stuff on tape and submixing.
Yeah.
And
there were so many tracks.
And the problem was, like, he would come up with an idea, not the problem, but if he had an idea and you heard it and you're like, this isn't going to stick around. Like, you could tell every once in a while, I'd be like, no, this doesn't even sound like him. But there'd be 70 tracks you'd have to record of it for him to then say,
realize,
no. All right. But brilliant and super nice guy,
Yeah.
He's great.
Oh yeah. I loved him. Yep.
Really, really great. All right. Let's talk about Fiona Apple. Shall we?
Love that. Yep. Love Fiona.
Because we gotta.
Come on. She's probably my favorite artist around these days. I mean,
well, tell me everything. Let's just.
Well, I mean, the first album that I did with her was Extraordinary Machine. No, wait a minute. Actually, I take that back. I did mix a single. I'm just remembering this now. It was one song, I think, for maybe a soundtrack. She did a version of Somebody to Love, not the Queen song, Bring Me Someone to Love, the standard, for some movie. And this is like, it was right around after I did the Macy Gray record, because she was managed by Andy Slater, the producer of Macy. And so he asked me to mix it. And so I didn't meet Fiona then, but then when she was going to make this Extraordinary Machine album, it was kind of known at the time. She had, a big budget, if not an unlimited budget, to make her dream record with John Bryan, who had produced the album before.
Yeah. And was Andy head of the label at this point yet? Or
yes, he was. He was at Capitol at this point. Because I think I don't know, what does it say what year it was? Somewhere around.
Well, I think it was 2005.
2005. Okay, sounds about right. So, so Andy wasn't managing her anymore, but Mike Elizondo, who I had worked with, maybe on Macy, I think before that on another Macy Gray record that happened in between those two, the version that she was doing with John Bryan came to a halt. Not exactly sure why, but the story was that they had spent so much money, and it was like this, everything was orchestral with arrangements from John and Patrick Warren that they recorded at Abbey Road. And it was not a typical Fiona Apple album. And the label maybe finally heard something, some rough mixes, and they put the brakes on it because it freaked them out.
And this is only your second record, though, isn't it?
No, it's their third record.
It's the third record. Okay.
Yeah. The first record was Tidal. Second record was the John Bryan.
Okay. All right.
And then this one. And so anyway, so it just kind of sat around, lost momentum. And somehow Mike Elizondo got involved with her and started kind of cutting new versions of the songs to see what they might sound like and if she might like them. And she did. And so they kind of continued and basically recut most of the album. And Mike asked me to mix it. So I was very excited because I'm a huge fan of hers. And at that time I had the Way Station here. So we mixed at the Way Station. And Fiona, if anybody knows about, she's kind of a recluse and she doesn't drive. So the idea of her coming to the mix sessions was just not really going to happen. So it was basically me here. And I don't even remember how much Mike was actually here, because I just remember we'd send CDs, to Mike. And then if Mike was good with it, then we'd send it to Fiona. And the mix process was pretty simple. And I was afraid because they had this other version that had leaked, and people were on the internet saying how much they loved it. And they had this thing called a Free Fiona campaign, right? Where her fans were like, put it out, let her free,
Right.
And I thought, man, we're doing this other version and they're going to compare it to that version and they're not going to like it because it's different. And, and the record company came up to have a listen to it. And I was worried about that because, what if they don't like it? But anyway, at the end of the day, record company loved it. They came up, had a listen. Fiona was very happy with it. She had minimal notes, and it was like a kind of an easy album to mix. It went without any hitches really. So I remember the mastering. We went for mastering, and it was like one of the few times that there was like no notes for mastering. But one of the things what I loved about it, I knew John Bryan from having working on the Macy Gray record, because he did a lot of amazing playing on that record. And I was a huge fan. And at that time I was like constantly going down to Largo to see him do his thing, which was kind of at its peak then. But so they decided that they wanted to use two songs from John's original productions, which were these orchestral pieces. And I just wondered, wow, how are we going to fit these on the record when the rest of it's not anything like that? Where are they going to go in the sequence? And Fiona had the idea of putting them as bookends, one at the front and one at the back. So Extraordinary Machine, the first song, starts it, and I space it on the last song. But so that was a great experience, and I loved mixing with John, doing these orchestral pieces, which was kind of new for me. And then, gosh, I mean, I don't know how many years it is after that it's probably 7 years that Charlie Drayton, and she did her fourth record. The Idler Wheel is the title. And Charlie I had known about and been a fan of. He's, an amazing drummer and bass player and producer, a real, musician and guy who's been at it since he was a kid. So I was very excited to work with Charlie on it. And the second album, again, was a pretty easy, straight ahead thing where it was mainly me and Charlie here, and Fiona would come down every once in a while, or we'd send stuff to her. And it was just, I love working with her. She's, she is always trying to do something new, or I don't even know if she's intentionally trying to do something new, but I think she thinks about what she's going to do, and also her instincts on what to do are not traditional a lot of time, and come from a real artistic angle. So, and she just has the best lyrics of anybody around, I think. And if you've never seen her perform live, you have to do it, because just the intensity with which she performs is just it's just amazing. So anyway, did those two records, and she has a lot of time in between those, and I worked a little bit with her in between Idler Wheel and the last record. She was part of the Echo in the Canyon project, the film and the album that goes with it. So she's on that, and I've worked with her sister Maud a bit. So kind of see her a little through the years relating to Maud. But anyway, and then this last record, Fetch the Bolt Cutters, which came out during the lockdown, I think April, something like that, March or April. And this was a different than the other two in the process, very different. Whereas the other two, there was a producer, Mike, and then Charlie and Fiona produced Idler Wheel,
right?
But, a partner, right? And this one, she recorded with the band, and the band, she said, I think at the outset, that she wanted to do something band centric. So they kind of went down to what's it called down there in Austin, in Texas? Why am I spacing on the name of the studio? Something Ranch.
Oh, Sonic Ranch outside
Sonic
of
Ranch. Yes,
yeah.
And
Outside El Paso.
Yeah, but it went through. It went through a pretty long period of recording there, then coming back to LA, recording at John Wood's house, John Wood's studio, where John had worked on her previous records, and then she decided she wanted to record some of it. She wanted to do recording at her house, so they set up stuff at her house to record there. So it kind of went through these different stages, and over a 2-year period, I think, which for her was probably longer than she had taken with the other ones. And I think, from what I understand, she doesn't really go into record stuff until she has the songs. And I think this time they went into it kind of like writing songs together with the band. So it was different in that regard, I think. But and then so they said, we think we're ready to mix. Want to send you a couple of songs. So they sent me a couple of songs, and I started mixing them here kind of on my own. I just said, go to town, do whatever you want to do. And then she and Andy Slater, her manager, who's also a producer, and Amy, who's a big part of this record, recording some stuff with Fiona at her house and doing drum overdubs and stuff. They would come up and we'd talk about changing things, and all of a sudden we were doing new vocals and new pianos and percussion and stuff like that. So it was editing things, and so it was kind of more than mixing, and we spread that out over months of just kind of reworking the songs again. And then I'm trying to think what the timeline was. Yeah, I'd say maybe about 4 or 5 months of that, not all the time, but just we'd meet for 2 or 3 days, and then she would, recut a couple. The song "Fetch the Bolt Cutters" wasn't even part of, that she did at her house on GarageBand, and brought it in one day on her laptop and said, I think this is going to be the title track. And we played it, and we're like, oh shit, that's amazing. So she did that for another song that she just recut from scratch again at her house. And so, if you've heard the record, there's not a lot of piano on it. She's playing a lot of drums and percussion and stuff. So, and a lot of overdub vocals, it's like, it's different than any of the other records in that respect.
Yeah.
And I mean, honestly, it's different from anything I've ever heard from anybody ever. You know what I mean? And I thought that about the Idler Wheel, because I thought that was extremely different than, particularly from the albums before that, which were very big, kind of John Bryan layered productions. Right. Idler Wheel, Idler Wheel was more of a stripped down thing, though it was still piano centric. And this one was unlike any of those, so anyway, and then, so I did some mixes, and I think they sat around for a while. And then I think, as was kind of the process, I think in Extraordinary Machine, where it went out for so long, start to have, doubts about things, and, maybe, is this done? I don't know if this is done, So then they had the idea of sending some stuff to Chad and see what he would do with it. So I was actually kind of excited, as bummed as I was about that. On one side, I was also like, ooh, because I'm a big fan of Chad's. Right. And so I was like, well, this will be great. Honestly, I'm sure it's going to be great. So so then he ended up, I think he probably mixed the whole album, I'm guessing, but they ended up using, I think, 4 of my mixes that I did, and then one of John's that he did before even I got it. So yeah, it was, but I gotta say that last record is a real kind of team effort with the band, and it's really Fiona at the helm, more so than any of her previous records. Like she was here, whereas on the other records, I would just see her a little bit here and there. She was here, 3 times a week, all day for weeks and weeks and weeks. So
right.
It was very different. And like I said, we were doing overdubs and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, but she's something else, man. She's just incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. Such a talent. And it was also interesting because I thought when I listened to the record, like there's something familiar in the bass on a few of them, but there's the Sebastian from Soul Coughing connection with Chad again. And it's like, that was familiar because he did the first 2, maybe 3 Soul Coughing records too.
Yeah,
so.
That's right. I hadn't even thought about that. But yeah, I mean, all the guys, all the people in her band, Sebastian, Amy, David Garza, they're just really great musicians who all kind of share her, I think, vantage point of just not doing what you think you should do. Come up with something.
But all, it's like you can hear them listening the whole time.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not just going out there for the sake of it to do something else. It's like it's all reacting to what else is going on. Yeah, it's an extraordinary record. It's really great. So you mentioned Echo in the Canyon, so we can work backwards a little bit because we should talk about that because that was a big deal.
Not too long ago, yeah. That was a lot of fun to make, and it took a long time. It started out as just an album, an idea of like kind of a covers album with Jacob doing duets with a bunch of his contemporaries, reinterpreting these classic, Laurel Canyon kind of songs from like not what we typically think of as Laurel Canyon, which would be like Joni Mitchell and the Jackson Browne and Neil Young kind of early 70s period. We're talking about the 1965, 66 up to 67 kind of band version of the Canyon, where everybody, as it turns out, wanted to be the Beatles. And so the Byrds decide, we're going to take folk songs and turn them electric, So I thought I knew, a good deal about the Laurel Canyon scene, but as we got to, make the record and even more so get into the interviews and stuff for the movie, I realized I didn't know anything about it, and I've really come to appreciate this incredible special time that it was here, and it literally is. I'm not in Laurel Canyon, but
you're
very
one
close.
canyon over,
Yeah, I'm canyon over, but there's some kind of energy in the canyons for sure, But that time, it's just incredible. So, and not only do we get to make these, it's like I said, it started as an album where we did these songs with Beck and Nora Jones and Cat Power and Fiona, Josh Homme from Queens of the Stone Age. Who am I forgetting? Jade from Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros. I know I'm forgetting somebody. So Eric Clapton, Neil Young,
some little guy, whatever.
So so we get to then record interviews with all these people and hear all these stories, and and then do the mix for the movie, do the live concert thing. It was a lot of fun, a lot of work, but a lot of fun.
So, but did I may have this wrong, but did Clear Mountain help out with the surround or the film mix? Or not at all?
No,
was he?
No, he's Bob's not involved in that. There's another project I did with Bob later, but
okay. I'm getting things confused.
No, Bob. Echo was I did the album version and the movie. The movie. Yeah.
And so when you started it, though, you thought it was just going to be a record, and that's it.
Yeah. And then, I think Andy had the idea that, well, maybe we should make a little documentary that goes with the album, so to speak, and then that, spiraled into a full-on feature.
Yeah, because it's a big deal, and really great.
Yeah. In the beginning, we didn't know that it was going to end up being that, but each step of the way, we call Andy the tank because he just keeps going, and it's like, you think he's biting off more than he can chew. And 3 months later, you're over recording Clapton at Mark Knopfler's studio,
Right.
Yeah.
As you do.
Yeah.
Because Knopfler's not really good enough, is he? You got to get Clapton.
No, yeah. Well, maybe he's just not old enough or something. He wasn't in the canyon. At least Eric was here for a bit. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, and so you also spent quite a few years doing all the music for Sons of Anarchy, right?
Yeah, Sons of Anarchy. That was a lot of fun. For the most part, all the band kind of stuff on that, which Bob Thiel kind of intentionally made it a house band with some of the great musicians here in town, Greg Lease and Davey Farragher and
Lee,
Brian Cloud and Matt Chamberlain, a bunch of, just great studio guys here in town. And we do these kind of, cover versions, different styles of cover versions of classic rock songs, and it was a lot of fun. And we recorded here, and then I'd mix it and be on the show in a month's time, whatever. Yeah, it was fun to watch how much the music, because they would put big, sequences with music for there'd be 10 minutes of music with no dialogue, and that never really happens on television. So the music was featured pretty much, and it was nice to see the audiences really kind of embrace that and kind of connect with it, so that was fun.
Yeah, and obviously it's not the only thing you did during that period, but it ends up being a big part of your life while you're doing something like that.
Well, yeah, I don't remember how many seasons it was. I think it was 8 seasons. I can't remember.
Yeah, something like that.
Seasons. So it was, every time we'd start another season, I couldn't wait,
Yeah.
And also starting to work in, TV in a more, episodic way like that, and doing film scores and stuff. This is also stuff that I hadn't really done up till that point, and I kind of continue to do a little more, as time goes on. So it's just more different stuff that you're like, I can do that.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, it's like at the very beginning with the wall of gear. Like, yep,
Yeah,
I know
exactly.
that. You know,
Yeah. Well, I didn't know that. I
no,
was bumping my way through that one, but yeah. But this other stuff, I'm like, even if I haven't really done it full on like that, it's like there's nothing new there. It's just some
no,
new terrain to find out. Yeah.
nothing new under the sun. Just more
Yeah.
speakers and
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Well, and musically, on a sort of similar note, we got to talk about a band that does not get as much juice, especially internationally, as they deserve, and that's Jack Shit.
You know what? We just did a jack shit session here the other day.
Did you?
Which, yeah, where this was our first kind of band session here since the lockdown. I've done a couple of overdub things, but and man, it was so good. When Pete Thomas walked through the door with his drum kit and his baked potato shirt and his shorts, I was like,
His Hawaiian shorts,
here we go. Yes,
flower
exactly.
shorts. Well, you want
I
to
love
explain to the kids who Jack Shit is, because outside of L.A., they're not that well known, as it turns out.
Well,
which is
outside
stupid.
of Cocktoten, yeah. No, well, yeah, Jack Shit are three fellers, tall fellers, from Cocktoten, California, which is 90 miles south of Bakersfield, for anybody who wants to look at a map. And then, but they've been doing.
I love that you know the
Jack
spiel
Shit
like
concerts.
word for word too.
Oh, I've seen so many Jack Shit shows. Are you
Yeah.
kidding me? I'm number one fan. They've been doing it for, I don't even know how many years, but it's
got to be
Pete
15
Thomas.
or something at least.
Yeah,
right?
I'd say probably, because I've been watching it for probably 10, right? Maybe. So, and it was going on before I became aware of it. So it's Pete Thomas and Davey Farragher from Elvis Costello's band, and Val McCallum, who plays with Jackson Brown and Shelby Lynn. He's just an amazing
crazy
player.
good.
Yeah, he's really good. They're all amazingly good. And, they have so much room as this trio. They do cover versions. They don't, there's no original material. They just do kind of countrified versions of stuff. But they are better known as Beau Shit, Shorty Shit, and Piece of Shit. And then they'll have their shows down at the Baked Potato, and you'll see Jackson Brown or Lucinda Williams or Dave Alvin or John Doe. People sit in with them all the time, and it's never not a hoot to watch them play. It's so great.
Yeah.
And so I've been fortunate to record them as a unit, kind of a few times, where I did a record with them where it just kind of started as they came up for something else. I don't remember what it was, playing on somebody else's record or something, and we just decided, well, it's all set up, but you want to record some Jack Shit songs? And they did, and then we did that a couple more times, and before you know it, we made a record. And then let's see, I was just
which is, I think, how they've made every record, because they did the same thing
Probably,
for the first record. It was like they were into play on stuff with Chad, and it's like, well, someone didn't show up, let's cut a record.
Yeah. Did they cut a record with Chad?
No, with John Paterno did a lot of work on it, but I think it was on, I could be wrong, but I think it was like a Chad session where people didn't show up. So everybody split. Yeah. And it's like, all right, let's do that. Yeah. I'm sure
those guys play a lot with Mitchell Froome. They do a lot of
exactly.
Yeah. And they're just, they've been playing with each other for so long. So as a rhythm section, they are something special. And so I've had a couple of times where on albums I'm producing, we'll just ask them to be the rhythm section, and they say yes. I can't believe it. Yeah. But they're such brilliant musicians. You just let them do what they're going to do, and it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, they're incredible. So look, there's plenty of stuff I skipped over, but is there anything in particular, or should we get to a little bit of product placement? Because you don't just make records, you make hits. One of the most touted products that
we don't.
If you got a can of that over there,
can we see that? There you go.
Dave Weigh's shit spray.
It's hit spray. Why would you say shit spray? Why would you put? I don't know why you would do that. This is a joke that ran too far, but I was doing something similar to this with Warren Hewitt, right? You know Warren, and I was out with my buddy Dylan O'Brien the night before, and I was like, "Oh, I'm going to be doing this kind of interview. It'll be on camera and stuff." And it's like, I don't have the cool beard like Andrew, or the cool hat like Don was, or or Jack, or any of these guys. So, I have to have something. I don't have any plugins. What can I do? So yeah, and he literally we came up with this idea for hit spray that whatever.
So how do you end up at Canned Air? I mean,
well, as I said, it went too far. I made up. I think
there's some drinks involved.
This Warren
right?
thing. I called Howie Weinberg, who works like right over in Laurel Canyon, so he's close by. And I said, "Hey, Howie, do me a favor. When you're coming into the office tomorrow, right before you go there, just come to my place and come into the studio. I'll leave the door open, knock on the door, and come in. And I want you to just say, 'Hey, you got any more of that spray?' It really works," right? So, am I giving away the whole thing by telling this story?
What giving away what?
Okay. So he comes in, but I was like, you know what? But Howie, I don't know if I can depend on him to come in. So I called Ross Hogarth and I said, "Ross, will you just, I said, you can't come by, but maybe FaceTime with me while I'm in the middle of this thing and ask me if I've got any more of that spray, because you really need it, because it works." Because it does work. I got, these guys have actually used it.
Yeah.
But so anyway, just serendipitously, I'm doing the interview right here. I'm sitting here. And then at like 11 o'clock or whatever time it was, Howie comes walking in and asks on cue for the spray. And then at the same time,
you've already got Ross on FaceTime.
Yeah, it just happened to work. And like Warren had no idea what's going on. He's like, "What the hell is this?" So anyway, that was the birth of the hit spray. And I decided I'm just going to get some cans of this made, So I found somebody who would make a can. I don't know how many cans I have. Not that much left, actually.
Right, but it's the kind of thing you got to buy by the pallet, right? You're not just like, "Can I get 12 cans of air with custom labels?"
1,500, I think, was the minimum order.
And you were selling them for a bit, right?
Well, you know what? I did.
I mean, as a joke, there was a website where you could order them.
I did. I decided I need to get rid of these, but then I realized that people out there, if you have a can of hit spray, you can't spray it on people, because this stuff is there's a whole bunch of warnings on here about spraying Freon, basically, which is what's in it.
Yeah, don't flip it upside down.
Yeah, don't flip it upside down, and don't spray it on your eyes or something. So I decided I don't want a lawsuit here. So I'm just going to give it away to some friends and make them understand that they can't spray it on anybody. Don't get drunk at a party and start spraying hit spray around. But it does work. I use it every day. I spray off my console. Oh, this one's already gone. See, look at this. I spray all my gear, and it's never failed me. So
and that's all we have to say about that.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was quite a thing. It was everywhere. It was all over the internet. Big deal.
I don't know.
Oh God, yes. Yeah, Facebook was basically the Dave Weiss hit spray hub for months.
All right, good. Whoever my marketing guy was doing a great job.
Well, you had a Greg Lee's video, and he was playing like crap, which he's not known to do until you sprayed him.
No, I know, but it helped him. It saved Greg Lee's career, I think.
Yeah, he was in the toilet, and then
Dean Parks too. Dean was having a really bad day, like everybody's entitled to once in a while, but a little hit spray, and Dean sounds like Dean Parks. It's amazing.
Yeah. You got to have something to do. You need a sideline. You're right. I got the beard.
Yeah,
You've
exactly.
got internationally
I can't
renowned.
compete in that regard, so I had to come at it from another
Well,
side here.
the key to that is stop
Well,
shaving.
I'm pretty good at that. How long have you had a beard? You didn't have a beard when I first met you, did you? Did you?
No, no, I didn't. I didn't. I had still had the dreads, or I was starting the dreads at that point. I am a poster child for not doing anything. So like I haven't had a haircut or trimmed my beard in 15 years, I think.
No way.
Yeah, this is just like it's
It
like
just
eyebrows. It
doesn't
doesn't grow
not,
longer.
it doesn't grow any longer.
No,
Right.
which
Okay.
I'm really bummed out about. I've thought when
Yeah.
I first started growing it, like this will be amazing to be down to my knees. No, this is it.
But you don't want to be tripping on your hair or your beard. That could
No,
be,
no. I mean, I had the problem sitting on the dreadlocks. That's why they had to go. So,
oh boy.
But yeah, I was actually kind of shocked. It would not grow any longer than this.
Well, maybe one day I'll try and see how long I can grow a beard. But
Dude, you have missed your opportunity. Like, what else
is
was
it-
2020
right,
for?
exactly. I'll be dead by the time it gets as long as yours.
Well, no, I'm just saying, like, this was the year to do it, right? Like,
You're right. You're right.
You
No,
know,
I went the other way. I pulled out the clippers.
you got the
yeah.
clippers. Well, and for those who don't know, there's also a fantastic video of Dave getting a haircut from Mark Hudson on that Ringo record.
Yep, exactly.
And did you keep the hat, or did Mark make you give it back to
No,
him?
I think Mark's probably got the hat.
That's a shame.
Yeah.
That's a shame.
But
So
yeah, I went back to the clippers though. I still love the clippers.
So look, I know you got the Dolby guys coming because you're
Yeah.
delving into the world of Atmos, which is pretty
Yes,
exciting.
you see there's speakers everywhere at the way station now, and
It's kind of my fault, I think, because I put you in
it
touch
is. You're
with
the
Carrie
one
from
who
Dolby,
did it.
and I
Yes.
still haven't done it because I just haven't done it.
Well, I literally just I did a film score. Well, I did 2 film scores this year, but the last one I just did, I mixed in 5/1. So I kind of was like, all right, I'll set up for 5/1, but then I had an Atmos mix to do right after that. And rather than go to Capitol, I thought, well, if I make the move into Atmos now, I could do that here. And then I could be mixing in Atmos all the time. So, because have you tried it yet?
I haven't actually been on a system. I've done a lot of binaural. I've listened to a ton, but I haven't actually had my mixes up on a playback system yet.
It's fun, man. It's fun. It's a little hard at first because there's so many places you could put things, and so I think you got to kind of build up a knowledge of instinctually where to put things first in order to kind of, I've been experimenting, but I'm feeling like, okay, I'm getting a handle on this now. So
yeah, well, it's really different to 5/1 in that instead of thinking like, well, okay, this is going to go here, or whatever, you can sort of build a thing, and then that thing can move around as a block as well.
Right.
You can have like a big stereo wide thing that can move, as opposed to just little individual elements. And
I think 5/1 is still pretty much in the front with
some
stuff in the back a bit, but there's not so much of that in the middle, and
Yeah.
there's certainly nothing above you. And it's the above you stuff that's really fun to play with, because then you feel like, where's that coming from? You know what I mean? You're just like, you listen like this now, Yeah, it's been fun. And I've done a couple, so I'm excited about it, and I want to do everything in Atmos now. So
right.
the Jack Shit Boys were here the other day, and even just after the tracking thing, I'm putting everything in different speakers, and they're all like, "Whoa, whoa!" So it was fun.
And I think that is the thing. It's because again, 5/1 with a trio, like, well, you don't really want to break it apart that much. But now this is really about sitting inside of it in a different way.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, it all depends on the music, because, the first thing I did was this Hawaiian album where it was kind of like a jazz record in that it was just a capture of musicians in a room. And, I was really just using the Atmos as the space to put them in. There's not stuff moving around, and it's pretty much static, but you're inside of it as opposed to in front of it. And I love doing that. But then this album I'm mixing right now, Bad Think, which is very much a different it's just like a layered overdub. It's meant to be done in Atmos where stuff are coming from speakers all over the place. So that's a very different thing. And there's lots of things moving around and it's just ear candy galore.
Right.
So, yeah.
Nice.
It's fun, man. It's fun. You're going to get into it. I'm telling you.
I know. I probably will. I went to college with Andy Potvin, who's one of the guys who's been at Dolby forever. So I've known him forever. And he and his wife were here last year for a bit. And he actually came up with the laptop and measured like, yeah, you could just about do it in there. Like,
oh,
damn
really?
it.
Yeah.
I was kind of hoping he'd say, no, it's impossible.
Right. You'd have to move.
Oh, yeah, but no, I can do it. So yeah, we'll see. So is there anything else in particular you want to talk about? Or should we get Mark in here and get some questions?
I think we've exhausted your listeners with.
No, you'd be surprised, man. Yeah, the stories are amazing, but it's just how it all ties together in your journey through it. That's incredible because it's easy to look at the discography and try and figure out like why you moved from one thing to another and what you were doing where. But
2:30. Oh my God, it's
3 hours. 3 hours. That's short, man.
Yeah.
That's short.
Yes, we're done talking. What else do you want to do?
So let's do some Q&A. But it's awesome, man. Because the thing about, and I mentioned it earlier, like the thing about your mixes from the very beginning is they always serve the song. And it doesn't matter what the genre was or whatever. It's always, you could listen to the ear candy. You can check out what you do on certain things, but the vocal's always right there. The core instrumentation is right there. And it's just a joy to listen to,
Yep. That's it, right? It is always about the song. If outside of jam stuff or jazz or something like that, it's about the song. Yeah.
But even then, it's about finding the focus. Like on on Chris's record, an instrumental record, you still need a reason to be listening to it, and you're just great at finding the core of that really naturally. So
thank you.
There you go.
Appreciate that.
All right, let's see. Did Mark go to sleep, or is he still around? Sometimes
hello.
There he is. He always makes me think he didn't hear me, but then he pops in.
It's waiting for my moment.
Excellent.
The big moment. This has been incredible. Thank you guys very much.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for sharing all this. Okay. So Dave, how it works, we're broadcasting to a platform called Crowdcast, which is where our chat room's at, and they can submit questions there and upvote each other's questions and all kinds of stuff. So we always start with the most upvoted question. And today that question is from Ryan from Belfast. Cool. And he asks, what do you think that the 2021 plus music industry looks like? And what, if you were starting out now outside of LA, as many of us are, what would you do?
Oh boy, that's kind of impossible to think about. I don't know. I have to guess that it's going to be more recording and video oriented than concert oriented, which is where it's been for the last good 10 years or so. I think also at the gatekeepers, as they've kind of been, traditionally, like radio, and for a while it was MTV or whatever. But now I think so much of that is irrelevant, that artists are able to do whatever it is that they really want to do, to kind of, take an artistic vision and run with it without trying to, do whatever they have to do to get signed or get traction and stuff. So I think because of that, to really test the edges of what music is and what, what the formats are that will deliver that to people, where those are, find the edges of it and go past it, because I think for me, over the last 100 years or so, the the places that I think you see the most societal movement forward is from music and from comedians, because they're testing the edges and then going past it. So like when, Louis Armstrong took jazz to a place where, people thought that's not music, that's crazy, you can't do that. And same thing with rock and roll, and same thing with punk music in the 70s, and the same thing with hip hop. And, so that's where the new stuff comes from. So I think now's a good time to be testing the edges.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. It's a great answer. Okay. So our next question is also from Ryan, and he asks, what is the most common flaw you noticed in tracks from no-name mixers or producers?
Most common mistakes, or what do you say? Flaws? Is that what you said?
Yeah. Mistakes or flaws.
Outside of the annoying, like not labeling things right, or or giving me stereo tracks of everything rather than mono of, I think just in general, too many tracks, too many choices. As a mixer, I don't want to, do a Macy Gray record again where I have to try and figure out what the song is by, automating and turning things on and off. That's in general, that's, if we had Pro Tools back then, and we could have figured all that stuff out before it gets to the mix stage, we would have. And that's one of the best things that you're able to do now is, you can take it so far. So quite often I get rough mixes that I'm like, this sounds great. What am I going to do? How am I going to make this better? What, maybe I can make it 10% better. I don't know. So, I think take it as far as you can, make all those choices, and I think, make them earlier. So I think people spend too much time building and layering and layering to the point where, it's like anything. The more, it's all about the relativity of all the parts, right? So if you make the vocals just huge, the track is going to sound puny. And so now you're going to have to beef up the track in a way that, you wouldn't have to if the vocals weren't so big. So just make the relative size of the vocals to the track work, and don't fill it up just because you think I have all these tracks and that's what the professionals do. And that's, we need to quadruple each note. And then, so too many tracks, too many choices.
Awesome. Cool. It's a theme that comes up a lot in these things.
I bet,
yeah. Commitment and intention and all that.
Yeah.
Okay, so our next question is from Alex Urin, and Alex says, if I remember correctly, you prefer a single overhead mic on a kit versus two mics. How do you get any width on the kit when mixing, or do you just prefer a kit that's mostly in the center? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I do like a mono overhead. But I don't use that exclusively. I usually set up with both. I'll have, like on my kit out here, I have a pair of Coles, and then I have a D19 as my mono overhead. And that way I can kind of choose or even use a combination of the three. But, width, that's another thing that I think is a buzzword that's over, making a mix wide. I don't understand why wide is so good. You know what I mean? Because there's a lot of power right up the middle, and, having everything be wide just sounds kind of mushy to me, So I don't always want my drums to be spread out, and, especially if I have guitars that are going to be spread out, I want something to be in the middle so that I can understand that the guitars are outside of it, So if everything's kind of battling to be on the outsides, and then you got just a vocal and maybe a bass, there's no kind of contrast between center and sides, So if I'm miking a kit, I usually have both. But I do kind of prefer a mono overhead because I feel like it's just a lot of times more powerful, you know, and a lot of times you just want the drums kind of narrow up the middle. And I do another thing sometimes where I'll have a mono overhead, but then I'll have two mics on the front sides of the kit. So I'll get width that way, but it's got less cymbals in it that way, you know.
Nice.
Which is good because we hate cymbals.
Cymbals eat guitars.
Yes,
I think,
exactly.
the idea is that your mix can be wide because you've got mono things placed all over the place, not because everything is wide. And it's an important distinction, and it's worth thinking about, because that again goes back to intention and the song and the arrangement, because you know this part's going to be over here and it's going to be balanced by that part over there, and therefore something else can be in the middle. And you need to think about all the parts in the song. And there's an amazing example of this I just thought about, because I remember talking to Joe Barresi about it like 39 weeks ago in the second one of these, because the latest Tool record that he mixed, the cymbals are mono. They're right up the center, but the toms are crazy wide, because that's what needed to happen. They didn't want to be taking up this upper mid space from the guitars, but still get width out of the kit by having the toms be really wide when he plays them. And apparently I've pissed Dave off. He's done with me.
So bad that he left the camera on too.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. The Dolby guys are here, as you said. Yes.
All right. Well, so like one more then?
Sure.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay. Well, this is okay. You want to do fun or serious?
Whatever you want.
Okay. All right. Let's do fun. What is the crappiest outboard gear you've ever owned?
The crappiest outboard gear I've ever owned?
Yes.
Huh.
And that's from Lolly's
I don't know, because so often, something crappy is actually really cool. So,
well, what's the crappiest cool thing?
Yeah, let me think. Well, I'm looking around here. What's crappy laying around here?
Probably that MXR distortion pedal you had.
There's a Boss heavy metal pedal that is kind of crappy to some people, but sometimes I thought it was cool. Crappy mics. Well, I mean, back in the day, we called the American D22 a crappy mic, but I come to love that.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's too tough. My Harmony Rocket guitar is supposed to be a pretty crappy guitar. I like that a lot. I don't have an answer for that. Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Because nothing is crap. You can get something interesting out of anything.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
I mean,
well, somebody in the chat posted as a comment to that an M Audio Fast Track Pro.
I don't even know what that is.
No, I don't know what that is either.
But
I'll bet you there's at least one super cool record that was made on it. So,
right.
Good point.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I have any crappy gear. Do I? I don't know.
No, you got a lot of really great shit in there.
There's some good stuff. Yeah, you know how.
Yeah, we've all been like spying the racks behind you.
Well, that's not even a small percentage of it that you can see. It's wraparound in there.
That's awesome. Yeah, actually, Dave has a really good website. I think it's just daveway.com, right?
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can check out pictures of the way station on there.
Yeah. All right. Was the serious question a short one to end on, or is it going to?
Let's see. So favorite. Yeah, we can make it short. So favorite mic for vocals, which could be like the most often used, and then vocal chain most often used. We'll leave it there. Bob Holbrook.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of easy. I mean, for the most part, I have here almost most of the time it's a U47 or an SM7, right? My U47 goes into a 1081, and then it goes into an inward connections compressor. And that's it. And then the SM7 goes into an API mic pre, then into an API 560 EQ, where it's just probably taking off a bit of the low end and maybe making it a hair brighter. And that also goes into inward connections compressor. Sometimes I'll switch to an EAR 660 compressor, like a Fairchild kind of compressor. So those are the two vocal compressors I use most of the time.
There you go.
Yep.
I'd
Awesome.
go 1073, 1176. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yep. Yeah.
it's
That's
simple. And SM7's
yeah.
SM7's amazing. And a cheaper
We're both
large
using SM7s here.
yeah, and a cheaper large diaphragm thing, which is amazing, not for everybody, but if it's the right mic, it's an incredible mic, is the Mojave MA200. One of the first ones they brought out. The top end on it is kind of insane.
There's a tube large condenser mic made by Vanguard, which is I think fantastic for the money. It's amazing, and it's not expensive. I think it's $800 or something like that. It's called a V13.
Right.
Yep.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you have it. Dave,
Awesome.
thank you so
Mannheim
much.
also makes some really great mics. Check him out, Andrew Mannheim. Monheim. I think that's it.
That sounds right. We'll say that's right.
Right on.
Awesome.
Excellent. Dave, thank you so much for this. This has been incredible.
Fun. Where did the time go? I don't believe it.
I'm told you.
That's how it goes.
They're all asleep. How many? Do you get a view of how many people are still on? There's probably 13 people still.
It's pretty high. The retention's high.
Mark will get us the numbers soon enough. So,
Yes.
and for everybody, the podcast is out. The links are in the chat. And next week, Mr. John Paterno, who we spoke of earlier. So that should be great.
John, I said, hey.
And the other thing is, in 2 weeks is going to be the last show of the year, because I'm going to take December off, because it's actually a lot of work getting ready for this. But we're finishing up with part 5 of Steve Lillywhite, Q&A. So please send questions. Mark, maybe you can make up an email address for them to send questions to, because I'm not going to talk to Steve for 3 hours first. We're going in with questions.
And then,
So,
cool.
That'll go for 3 hours for sure.
Oh, it will. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But we've already done the interview part. Like now it's time for these guys to do the work. So I want to make sure they do.
Yeah.
So
that's
cool. It.
Yeah,
all
you
right,
guys,
awesome.
check
Thank
out
you so much, Dave.
Andrew's show page on Puremix. We'll probably put up a link there for Steve's questions.
Fantastic. All right.
Cool.
Thank
Awesome.
you, Andrew.
All right, we're all going to wave goodbye now, and I'm going to go to the thanks for watching screen.
All right.
All right.
Thanks for
See
watching.
ya.
Thanks for listening. Bye.